Have you ever wondered why you say yes when you mean no, or why you doubt yourself around certain people? Psychological manipulation is everywhere, quietly shaping your thoughts and choices. In this video, we'll uncover the hidden tactics that control you more than you realize and guide you gently into a restful sleep with the power of awareness. The echo chamber loop. You walk into a room, not a real one, but a digital one, a feed, a timeline, a channel. You scroll and what you see is comfort. Ideas you agree with, values that match yours, faces that nod when you nod, laughter that echoes your own. And at first, this feels like connection, like validation. But what if I told you that comfort is a cage, that this perfectly tailored world isn't truth, it's a mirror? And the longer you stay inside it, the more the walls tighten around you. This is the echo chamber loop, a psychological phenomenon where your thoughts, beliefs, and emotions are constantly reinforced by repetition, until they begin to feel like facts. And anything that doesn't match, it feels not just wrong, but threatening. Imagine standing in a hall of mirrors. Every direction you look, you see a version of yourself. You begin to forget there's a door. You forget there are people who look different, think different, believe different, because none of them are reflected back at you. And your mind, craving certainty, begins to believe that what you see most often must be what's real. But it's not real. It's engineered. Social media algorithms are not built for truth. They're built for engagement. For keeping your eyes glued, your fingers tapping, your emotions stirred. And what stirs the most emotion? Agreement, outrage, tribalism. So, the feed adapts, it learns. You liked one post on environmental activism? Suddenly your entire timeline becomes filled with it. You commented on a video about political injustice? Now the platform believes that's your identity, and it begins feeding you more of the same over and over until it's no longer information. It's indoctrination. And the danger doesn't stop there. The more you see the same ideas, the more they begin to feel like common sense. Like everyone must agree. Like dissent is absurd. And when someone finally breaks through your filter bubble, a friend, a family member, a stranger online, and says something that challenges your worldview, your brain doesn't process it as a perspective. It processes it as a threat. Fight or flight kicks in. You feel attacked. You lash out or shut down. Not because the idea was dangerous, but because it was unfamiliar. Because the echo chamber has made unfamiliarity feel like danger. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. The brain's tendency to search for, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms what we already believe. But inside an echo chamber, confirmation bias becomes amplified. It's like shouting into a canyon and hearing your own voice so many times that you forget you ever said it. You believe it came from the world, from reason, from truth. But it didn't. It came from inside you, and the chamber simply played it back. Think about it. Have you ever believed something just because everyone around you did? A rumor in school, a political take on your newsfeed, a social norm you never questioned. Maybe you nodded along because it felt easier, safer, more acceptable. But deep down, something in you hesitated. That hesitation is important. It's the signal that your mind still wants to think freely, but the echo chamber punishes hesitation. It rewards loyalty, not to truth, but to consensus. And this doesn't just happen online. Echo chambers exist in families, in friend groups, in workplaces, in entire cultures. A dinner table where everyone shares the same opinion and jokes about those people who think differently. A team meeting where no one challenges the boss, because doing so means risking isolation. A community where asking a hard question makes you an outsider. Over time, the chamber becomes a home, not because it nurtures you, but because it's the only place that doesn't reject you. But here's the paradox. The more we surround ourselves with agreement, the weaker our beliefs become. Not stronger, weaker. Because belief without challenge is not belief. It's repetition. And repetition is not truth. It's programming. If you've never had to defend an idea, question it, reshape it, then how can you be sure it's really yours? Maybe it was inherited. Maybe it was absorbed. Maybe it was never chosen at all. Let's take a hard example. Imagine you grow up in a household where one political party is constantly praised and the other is mocked. Every conversation reinforces that one side is good, the other is corrupt. You grow up believing this not because you researched it, but because it was the only story you heard. Now fast forward. You're an adult. You come across an article presenting the other side's perspective, with data, with nuance, with reason. What do you feel? Curiosity or anger? Do you lean in or scroll past? Do you question the article or question yourself? For most people, the instinct is to protect the belief, not test it, not explore it, because by now, the belief isn't just an opinion, it's identity. And that's the heart of the echo chamber loop. Over time, what you believe fuses with who you are, so when a new idea knocks at your door, it doesn't feel like an invitation to grow. It feels like an attack on yourself. And so, you retreat deeper into the chamber. You tighten your grip. You silence the doubt. Until eventually, you forget you ever had a choice. But you do have a choice. You can ask, where did this belief come from? When was the last time I changed my mind? Am I brave enough to sit with an idea that scares me, not because it's evil, but because it might be true? These questions are dangerous, but they're also liberating, because truth isn't found in comfort. It's found at the edge of discomfort, at the boundary between what you've always known and what you've never dared to consider. It takes courage to break the loop, to invite contradiction, to listen without needing to win, to hear someone out, not to convert them, but to understand them. It takes even more courage to admit when you were wrong, when the chamber shaped your thinking more than you realized. But in that moment of humility, something powerful happens. You become free. Not because you found the ultimate truth, but because you've rediscovered your ability to seek it. So next time you feel that rush of agreement, that warm glow of validation, pause. Ask yourself, do I believe this because it's true or because it's familiar? Then go one step further. Seek out a voice you disagree with, not to fight, but to learn. Read a book that challenges your worldview, or talk to someone who lives differently than you. Step outside the echo, even if just for a moment. Let your mind breathe in the air of contradiction. Let your beliefs stretch, crack, rebuild, because the truth is not an echo. It's a signal, often faint, often buried, but always there, waiting for you to listen. The scarcity mind trick. You're scrolling. A countdown blinks, only 5 left in stock. A red banner flashes. Sale ends in 1 hour. And suddenly, your heart rate quickens. You weren't even looking for this thing. But now, you feel like you need it. Like, if you don't act now, you'll miss something important, something valuable, something rare. But pause. This is not urgency. This is not value. This is psychology. You've just been hit by the scarcity mind trick. And it's more powerful than you think. See, your brain evolved in a world where scarcity was real. Food was limited. Shelter was temporary. Tools were rare. If you hesitated, someone else took what you needed. If you delayed, you could die. So your brain developed shortcuts. Mental reflexes to act fast when something seemed rare, when something might vanish. Those instincts are ancient, but the world you live in now is not. Today, scarcity is often an illusion, crafted, exaggerated, designed, but your brain doesn't know the difference. It still lights up. It still panics. It still believes. You've probably felt this in a flash sale, that only 2 seats left, warning on a flight, that last chance to save ad, or even when someone tells you they're considering multiple options, and you suddenly want to be chosen more, not because they're perfect, but because you might lose them. Scarcity warps value. It hijacks logic. It turns curiosity into craving. Studies have shown this again and again. When people are offered 2 identical cookies, one from a full jar, the other from a nearly empty one, they consistently rate the cookie from the near-empty jar as tasting better. Not more expensive, not more beautiful, better. Why? Because our minds don't just process what something is. We process how available it feels. The less available, the more important it seems. Not because it is, but because our neurons scream act now before it's gone. This is why marketing thrives on limited editions. Why social media runs on FOMO, the fear of missing out. Why collectibles feel magical. Why VIP access sells. And why relationships, too, can be poisoned by this reflex. Think about that person who pulls away just a little. Suddenly you can't stop thinking about them. Their distance creates scarcity. Not because they're right for you, but because they're withdrawing. Your mind doesn't see incompatibility. It sees an opportunity slipping through your fingers, and what slips away always looks more valuable than what stays. The irony? Much of what feels scarce is not. Hotels often show only one room left when there are dozens. Apps say, people are looking at this now, even when nobody is. The illusion is engineered, not to serve you, but to steer you, to override patience, to short-circuit thought. And it works, because your brain still believes it's on the savannah, competing for food, for warmth, for life. But now it's being manipulated into urgency over shoes, likes, status, attention. Scarcity sells stories too. Ever seen an exclusive truth video? A secret they don't want you to know? A hidden limited access club? The same trick again. Make an idea feel rare, and people won't just believe it. They'll cling to it. Because if it's hard to get, it must be closer to truth. But let's go deeper. Why does this work emotionally? Because scarcity hurts. When you're told something is limited, your body doesn't just think, it reacts. Cortisol spikes, focus narrows. Your decision-making literally shifts from the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for rational thought, to the amygdala and limbic system, the parts that control impulse, fear, and survival. You're no longer choosing. You're reacting. That's why it's so hard to resist. That's why, even when you know the trick, you still fall for it. This isn't stupidity. It's neurochemistry. But it doesn't stop there. There's a darker twist to the scarcity mind trick, when it's applied to you. Ever feel like you are running out? Running out of time. Running out of worth. Running out of chances. When society constantly bombards you with timelines, by 25 you must be here, by 30 you must have this, by 40 you must know that, you start to believe that you too are a vanishing product, that your value decreases with each passing year, that your worth is ticking away. So you rush, you settle, you panic purchase jobs, partners, homes, identities, not because they're right, but because your brain believes they were the last available option. This is scarcity turned inward, and it is brutal, because it doesn't just manipulate your purchases, it manipulates your path. But here's the truth that breaks the illusion. Value doesn't come from urgency. Worth doesn't come from rarity. Just because something is limited doesn't mean it's better. And just because something is abundant doesn't mean it's worse. The best relationships often take time to build. The deepest truths are often shared freely. The most meaningful work might not come with flashing lights or a ticking clock. The more something pressures you to decide now, the more it begs you not to think, the more you must pause. Because real value is not afraid of your hesitation. Real value welcomes it. Ask yourself, who benefits from your urgency? Whose timeline are you following? And what might you see, clearly, deeply, honestly, if you waited just a moment longer? Because in that pause, something breaks. Not the opportunity, not the connection, but the illusion. And once the illusion breaks, you can finally choose. Not from fear, not from pressure, but from truth. So the next time a red banner flashes, a countdown ticks, a voice whispers, act now. Let it tick. Let it flash. And let your mind watch, not rush. Because the rarest thing in this world isn't some object you're pressured to buy, or a person you're pressured to chase, or a deadline you're told to fear. The rarest thing is a mind that can pause, that can see, and that can say, I choose not because it's scarce, but because it's right. The empathy drain effect. You wake up and check your phone. The first thing you see is a heartbreaking post. A child starving in a war-torn region. You scroll down and there's another. An animal trembling in a cage, eyes pleading. A woman recounts her abusive past. A man sobs after losing everything in a flood. You don't even flinch anymore. You just scroll. You feel something maybe. But it's dull. A phantom pain. A numb throb. Not enough to make you stop. Not enough to make you act. And yet, when someone asks for your help, when a petition appears, a donation link, a please share, you do it, almost automatically, not because you care deeply, but because not helping feels worse, because guilt has replaced empathy. This is the empathy drain effect, a psychological erosion of genuine compassion, replaced by a kind of performative guilt-driven compliance. It's not that you're heartless, far from it. It's that you were too full of heart for too long, and now you're exhausted. You weren't designed to absorb the pain of the entire planet, and yet, every day you are asked to. Every day you are shown stories crafted to break you open, and over time, something inside you changes. Not because you're cruel, but because your nervous system simply cannot sustain endless sorrow. Imagine your empathy like a well, deep, generous, nourishing. But every time you see a tragedy, a bit of that water is drawn up. Another cup for a stranger's suffering, another for a cause, another for a crisis, and another, and another. Eventually the well runs low. And what's left at the bottom? Obligation, resentment, a hollow ache that feels like caring, but isn't. This is what happens when compassion becomes currency, when your goodness is leveraged, when your ability to feel is no longer yours, it's rented by everyone who knows how to tell a moving story. You're not donating to save lives. You're donating to make the guilt stop. You're not sharing a story because it moved you. You're sharing it because not sharing would feel selfish. You're no longer helping people. You're performing the role of someone who helps. And yet, strangely, your behavior looks more compassionate than ever. You've signed more petitions. You've attended more vigils. You've reshared more painful stories in 1 year than your ancestors saw in a lifetime. But inside, you feel less. You care less. Or maybe, more accurately, you care so much that you can't function. So your mind protects you the only way it knows how. It cuts off the feeling. It hardens. Not into cruelty, but into reflex. It starts subtly. At first, you cry every time. You ache. You can't sleep. You feel everything. But the next time, it's a little duller. And the next, duller still. Until eventually, you look at a video of a mother holding her dying child and feel tired. Not horrified. Just tired. Not because you lack empathy, but because it's been drained. This isn't a failure of character. It's the natural consequence of emotional saturation, of compassion fatigue. Your brain was built to empathize with your tribe, your village, your family. A small circle of people whose pain you could see, hold, respond to directly. But now, you are force-fed 1,000 tragedies a day. You are shown grief with no resolution, suffering you can't stop, injustice you can't fix. And each time, you're expected to react, to help, to feel, to give. But how much can you give before you become empty? And this is the trap. The more drained you are, the more easily manipulated you become. Because guilt is a powerful motivator. And when true empathy wears thin, guilt becomes the puppet string. You no longer ask, is this the right cause? Or, is this the best way to help? You just want the pressure to stop. You comply, not because it's meaningful, but because resistance feels selfish. You are no longer choosing your compassion. You are being guilted into submission. This isn't just emotional, it's neurological. Studies show that prolonged exposure to distressing emotional content changes the brain. The amygdala, responsible for processing emotion, begins to respond less. Your threshold for pain increases, but not in a good way. It means you need more shock to feel anything, more suffering to be moved. Until one day, nothing moves you at all. And then comes the shame. You notice that you're scrolling past real horror without flinching, that you're avoiding news, that you're muting people who share too much sadness, and you think, what's wrong with me? But nothing is wrong with you. You are responding exactly as a human was designed to, protecting yourself from drowning in the sea of suffering. But the world will tell you otherwise. It will say, feel more, do more, give more. It will say, if you don't care about this, you're a monster. And so, to silence that voice, you perform, you repost, you react, you smile sadly and say all the right things. But it's not coming from your well of empathy anymore. That well is dry. What you're offering now is a performance, a ritual of compliance. So what do? How do you stop being manipulated by your own goodness? You start by protecting your empathy as something sacred, not infinite. You stop letting strangers with sad stories rent your nervous system. You draw boundaries, not out of apathy, but out of reverence for your capacity to care. You start asking, is this cause actually helping someone, or is it just making me feel guilty enough to click? You reclaim your right to choose when, how, and whom to help. You remember that real compassion is not reactive. It is intentional. It is quiet. It does not scream at you from a headline. It does not demand proof of your virtue. And maybe most importantly, you begin to forgive yourself for not feeling enough, for feeling too much, for needing rest, for looking away. Because empathy was never meant to be a constant performance. It was meant to be a flame, lit when needed, protected when weary, a force to connect, not a tool to control. This is not about turning cold. It's about staying warm without burning out. It's about learning the difference between genuine compassion and weaponized guilt. Because if your empathy is always being drained, there's nothing left for the people who truly need it. The child in your neighborhood, the friend quietly suffering, the stranger you could help in a real, direct way, if you weren't so emotionally bankrupt from carrying the entire internet's sadness on your back. So, the next time a tragedy flashes across your screen, pause, feel what you feel, but then ask, is this mine to carry? If the answer is no, let it pass. Not because you don't care, but because you care enough to save your empathy for what truly matters, for what you can actually touch, change, heal, because your compassion is too precious to be drained. It deserves better than guilt. It deserves your protection, and maybe then, you'll start to feel again. Not because you've seen everything, but because you finally chose what to see. Not because you gave more, but because you gave better. Not because you were guilted, but because you remembered that empathy isn't something to be squeezed out of you. It's something to be honored, something to be shared when it means something, when it's real. That's how you begin to escape the empathy drain. Not by feeling everything, but by choosing intentionally, quietly, fiercely, what to feel and what to let go. The Reciprocity Mirage. You're walking down the street and someone offers to carry your groceries. You didn't ask, you didn't struggle, but before you know it, the bags are out of your hands. They smile, say it's no trouble at all. Moments later, they ask if you'd be willing to sign a petition, donate a little money, do them a favor, and you say yes. Not because you believe in the cause, not because it feels right, but because deep inside you feel like you owe them something. That subtle pressure, that silent internal nudge, is not your kindness speaking. It's the Reciprocity Mirage. This is not generosity, this is strategy. The Reciprocity Mirage begins with an illusion that a gift freely given must be repaid. But here's the twist. Many of these gifts are not gifts at all. They are traps wrapped in politeness. You're being nudged into a psychological corner, one where your need to be fair, to be good, to be grateful, becomes a weapon used against you. And this isn't rare. In fact, it's one of the most common forms of emotional manipulation in the world. It shows up at work. A colleague volunteers to help you finish a report. They insist. Don't worry about it, I've got you, they say. You accept. But weeks later, they remind you of what they did, then ask for your support on a project you don't agree with. Or they expect silence when you know something unethical happened, and your brain says, you owe them. Even when you didn't ask for help. Even when the favor turned into a transaction you never consented to. This is how the Reciprocity Mirage operates. By creating a debt where none should exist. By making you feel guilty for receiving, even when you didn't request. It turns your empathy into a leash. It takes the warm instinct to reciprocate and twists it into obedience. There's science behind this. Social psychologist Robert Cialdini famously studied this phenomenon. In one experiment, a researcher would hand people a soda as a gesture of friendliness. Moments later, they would ask the person to buy raffle tickets. Those who got the soda, who received a tiny unsolicited favor, were significantly more likely to agree, even if they didn't like the person, even if they didn't care about the raffle. The sense of indebtedness overrode logic. This is not about fairness, it's about control. Think of street performers who hand you a free bracelet. They tie it around your wrist before you can say no. Then they ask for a donation. And you pay. Not because you want the bracelet, but because they created a moment that feels morally binding. You feel rude if you walk away. You feel like a thief, even though they insisted it was free. But let's be honest, it was never free. It was bait, and the hook was your conscience. This tactic scales all the way up to governments, corporations, and institutions. Think about corporate gifts, lavish dinners, holiday baskets, exclusive events. These aren't thank yous. These are psychological priming devices. A pharmaceutical rep gives a doctor a free meal. Later, the doctor is more likely to prescribe that company's drug, even if it's not the best option for the patient. It doesn't feel like corruption. It feels like courtesy. But behind that courtesy is calculation. Now zoom in even closer. into your personal life. Ever known someone who constantly does things for your good, who steps in without being asked, who makes sacrifices you didn't require, then quietly expects you to rearrange your life in return? They say things like, "After everything I've done for you," or "I'm always there when you need me." But they don't just want appreciation. They want influence. They want leverage. They want silent control. And because we're wired to avoid being unfair, we comply. We say yes when we want to say no. We say thank you with a cracked smile. We carry guilt that was never ours to carry. The reciprocity mirage feeds on our deepest social instincts. From childhood, we're taught that good people return kindness, that not repaying a favor makes you selfish or ungrateful. But manipulators exploit that moral programming. They flood you with unrequested help, then anchor their worth to it. They build a debt-based identity. They become the person who's always giving. But their giving is poisoned with expectation. You know it's a mirage when saying no makes you feel like a villain, when rejecting a request feels like betraying someone, even though you never agreed to anything in the first place. That's not love. That's not loyalty. That's behavioral engineering. And the longer it goes on, the harder it is to escape. Because the more you repay, the deeper the illusion of debt becomes. You think you're clearing the ledger, but they're always moving the goalpost. The favors keep coming. The guilt keeps growing. And slowly you begin to question your own judgment. Am I being ungrateful? Am I selfish? Why do I feel like the bad guy for setting a boundary? Because that's exactly the feeling they've designed. The reciprocity mirage isn't just about manipulation. It's about identity erosion. It confuses your moral compass. It makes you question your own kindness. It blurs the line between generosity and coercion. And if you don't wake up to it, you'll spend years paying emotional debts you never signed up for. So, what can you do? First, recognize the pattern. Not all kindness is manipulation, but when generosity comes with pressure, expectation, or subtle guilt, pause. Ask yourself, did I ask for this? Am I being made to feel obligated? Is this favor being used as currency to control my behavior? Second, practice graceful resistance. It's okay to say, I appreciate the gesture, but I can't accept it. It's okay to untie the bracelet, to walk away from the soda, to say no to the silent strings. It's not rude, it's responsible. Because once you accept a false favor, the next move is no longer yours. And most importantly, don't be afraid to disappoint someone who's counting on your guilt. If a relationship only works when you're indebted, it was never balanced to begin with. Healthy people give without strings. Real generosity expects nothing. True support is not a loan with interest. It's a gift without conditions. So, if you've ever felt suffocated by someone's endless sacrifices, if you've ever felt guilt-wrapped gratitude for things you didn't ask for, if you've ever paid emotional dues to maintain peace, you're not alone. You were standing in the desert, staring at a shimmer that looked like kindness, but vanished when you tried to drink from it. That is the reciprocity mirage, and once you see it, you'll never fall for it again. The spotlight narrative. You don't always get to write your own story. Sometimes the version of you that survives in people's minds is the version they need you to be, not the version you truly are. That's the devastating truth behind the spotlight narrative. It's not just about gossip or criticism. It's about how others quietly, insistently retell your story, your flaws, your mistakes, your weaknesses, until those things become your entire identity, not only in their minds, but terrifyingly in yours. Imagine walking into a room where everyone has already decided who you are, not based on what you've done recently, not based on who you've become, but based on one moment, one misstep, one version of you frozen in their memory like a photograph, overexposed, poorly lit, and distorted by someone else's lens. You try to speak, to clarify, to show you've changed, but it doesn't matter, because the narrative is already written, and worse, it's being repeated. This is how it begins. You make a mistake. Maybe you were young, maybe you were hurting, maybe you were reacting in a moment of fear or confusion, but someone saw it, someone remembered it, and then they told someone else. But they didn't just describe the event, they shaped it, framed it, curated the details. Maybe they left out the context. Maybe they exaggerated your tone. Maybe they assigned motive. And now, it's not a moment. It's a myth. A story. and you're the villain in it. The human brain is wired for story. We don't remember data, we remember narrative, and once a story catches on, it becomes sticky. The more people repeat it, the more real it feels, even if it's wrong, even if it's warped. And because it's so repeatable, so emotionally charged, it spreads faster than truth ever could. Think of how reputations form in small communities or social circles. You snapped at someone during a hard day, suddenly you're the aggressive one. You failed a task once, now you're the unreliable one. You tried something ambitious and failed, you're delusional or reckless. One event, one crack in the surface. But the story gets told again and again, passed along like a secret, each time reinforcing the same labels. And here's where it gets even darker. People need you to stay in that role, because if you're the angry one, then they get to be the calm one. If you're the weak one, they get to be the strong one. If you're always wrong, then they're always right. Your flaw, when spotlighted in their story, becomes the shadow that makes their virtues shine brighter. This is the spotlight narrative, a tool of psychological control hiding in plain sight. It's not physical, but it's damaging. It cages you with invisible bars. It makes you doubt your own growth. And slowly, painfully, it convinces you to perform the version they created. Because resisting it feels exhausting. You say, "That's not me anymore," but they laugh or roll their eyes. They remind you, "But remember when you," and suddenly you're trapped, defending yourself against a past that refuses to die. Think of the quiet harm this does in families. A sibling gets cast as the irresponsible one, so their achievements are met with skepticism. A daughter speaks up once and forever becomes too emotional. A son fails to meet one expectation and becomes the disappointment. The rest of the family adjusts around that script, reinforcing it, repeating it, until it fossilizes into identity. Or in workplaces. You ask one too many questions in a meeting and suddenly you're labeled as difficult. You make one blunt remark and now you're aggressive. No one sees your intentions. No one checks your growth. They just replay the clip they've chosen over and over, like a broken loop in their memory. What makes this so painful is that the narrative often isn't built out of hatred. It's built out of laziness, or fear, or insecurity. People hold on to the old version of you because it's easier than learning the new one, or because that version just fits better with the role they've assigned themselves. So your story becomes theirs to retell, until your identity is no longer self-authored, but outsourced. And the most dangerous part? When you start to believe it. There's a psychological phenomenon called reflected appraisal. It means your self-image is shaped by how you believe others see you. If enough people see you as incompetent, you might stop trying. If they see you as unworthy, you might stop expecting good things. If they treat you like a burden, you might stop asking for help. This isn't just emotional. It's neurological. Your brain actually begins to reroute your identity based on the feedback loop of social mirroring. The spotlight narrative weaponizes this mechanism. It shines a harsh, narrow light on one part of you, your failure, your flaw, your moment of weakness, and forces you to live under it. You could become a completely different person, grow tenfold, prove yourself again and again, but the narrative doesn't budge, because it's not about truth. It's about power and repetition. The truth is, people rarely tell stories about you to reflect who you are. They tell stories to protect who they are, to justify their decisions, to shield their egos, to rally others behind their view of the world. And if casting you in a negative role serves that purpose, then your redemption is irrelevant to them. So what can you do? You resist the spotlight. You turn away from the script and write your own. You surround yourself with people who see whole stories, not just one chapter. People who witness your full arc, not just the fall, but the rise. You challenge the repetition. You ask, why do you keep telling that story? You say, I'm not that person anymore. You show them again and again until your reality outweighs the echo of their version. And even if they never change the story, you stop living by it. Because the greatest act of defiance isn't revenge. It isn't confrontation. It's self-authorship. It's choosing to define yourself by your becoming, not by their memory. It's refusing to let their lens shrink your identity. You are not the worst thing you've done. You are not the role someone else assigned to you. You are not the punchline in someone else's dinner story. You are a living, changing, complex being who deserves more than to be frozen in someone else's narrative. Step out of their spotlight and light your own stage. The identity fragmentation. You grow up believing you are whole, but slowly, so slowly you barely notice it, you begin to sense something's off. Not broken, not wrong, just incomplete. Like a subtle absence you can't name, a shadow where a shape should be. And then one day, someone arrives. Maybe a parent, a lover, a mentor, a stranger who speaks with confidence, and they don't just notice your absence, they name it. They say, "This is what you're missing, and I can give it to you." And because their words echo that quiet ache you've carried for years, you believe them. This is the root of identity fragmentation, a slow, often invisible process where the story you tell about yourself is edited. Not by you, but by the people you let close. Piece by piece, they carve out parts of you. They redefine your edges. They turn your doubts into facts. And instead of rejecting that, your mind, craving coherence, folds those edits into its architecture. You begin to think, maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I am hard to love. Maybe I do need them to feel like myself. The brain is wired to protect your sense of self. But when that self is fragmented, scattered across the hands of those who claim to love you, you spend your life chasing wholeness through them. You think you're being supported, but what you're actually doing is outsourcing your identity. You hand over your reflection and say, "Tell me who I am." And when they approve, you feel seen. When they withdraw, you feel erased. Not because you lost them, but because you lost the version of yourself they convinced you was real. It happens in childhood first. A parent who only praises you when you're quiet, so you shrink your voice. A caregiver who withdraws love when you cry, so you learn to smile through pain. A teacher who tells you you're not creative, so you abandon art before you begin. And it keeps happening. A partner who mocks your ambition until you call your dreams silly. A friend who rewards your people-pleasing, but punishes your boundaries. A world that tells you you're only valuable if you're useful, attractive, agreeable. And the damage isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's subtle, insidious. You stop trusting your instincts. You second-guess your needs. You look in the mirror and feel like a stranger, because the person looking back is a mosaic, shaped by other people's preferences, fears, projections, and you don't remember when you agreed to that. But you must have, right? You stayed, you adapted, you survived. But survival isn't identity. It's camouflage, and at some point, the disguise becomes too heavy. You start feeling like a ghost in your own body. Not because you don't exist, but because you only exist in fragments. One version for your boss, another for your family, another for your partner. And beneath them all, the real you, wordless, waiting, almost forgotten. This is why validation feels addictive. When someone offers approval, it feels like reclaiming a missing piece. But it's not your piece, it's theirs. Shaped by their needs, handed to you with conditions. You're lovable when you're easy. You're worthy when you agree. You're whole when I say so. And because the world taught you to doubt your own completeness, you cling to those counterfeit pieces like lifelines. But here's the tragedy. The more you depend on others to feel whole, the more fragmented you become. You contort to keep their approval. You abandon parts of yourself to avoid rejection. You trade authenticity for attachment. And in doing so, you reinforce the lie that you were never whole to begin with, but you were, you are. The missing piece was never missing. It was buried, covered by years of edits, expectations, and emotional conditioning. And reclaiming it means doing something terrifying. Choosing to disappoint people, choosing to be misunderstood, choosing to peel back the fragments and ask, what part of me was silenced so someone else could stay comfortable? That's not easy. It feels like betrayal. But the real betrayal was abandoning yourself to be accepted by someone who only loved the pieces they could control. To begin healing identity fragmentation, you have to reverse the loop. Start noticing who you become around different people. Do you shrink? Do you perform? Do you become exaggerated just to be noticed? Then ask, what would it feel like to exist fully, even if it meant losing their praise? This isn't about arrogance. It's about integration. Wholeness doesn't mean perfection. It means honesty. It means holding your flaws, your brilliance, your contradictions in one frame and saying, this is me. And when someone tries to hand you a version of yourself that doesn't fit, you say, no thank you, I've already met myself. You are not a puzzle missing pieces. You are not a reflection that only appears in their eyes. You are not a role to be cast, edited, praised, or rejected. You are the original. And the world may try to convince you otherwise, because fragmented people are easier to control. But you can wake up. You can return. You can begin the slow, sacred work of gathering every exiled part of you, not to impress anyone, but to finally feel real in your own skin. Because once you stop asking others to complete you, you remember something simple and powerful. No one holds your missing pieces. They never did. The time debt trap. You didn't mean to say yes, not really. You just didn't want to disappoint them, or leave someone waiting, or deal with the awkward pause that follows the word no. So you nodded, agreed, added one more small task to your day. It seemed harmless, a quick reply, a short favor, a 5-minute meeting. But they stacked, quietly, invisibly, until suddenly your time wasn't yours anymore. You were drowning in obligations you never truly chose, tired, irritated, and wondering, how did I get here? This is the time debt trap. It doesn't hit you like a crash. It builds like a leak. One yes at a time, one unchecked notification, one tiny promise whispered at the edge of your exhaustion. The debt doesn't look like debt at first. It looks like being helpful, being polite, being a team player. But every "sure, I can do that" is a loan against your future energy. And the interest, it compounds fast. Because time isn't infinite, and attention is not free. Your mind can't process 10,000 threads and still function like a calm, focused machine. Yet, we treat time like a junk drawer, cramming it with small requests, emotional favors, passive obligations, until there's no room to breathe. And then we wonder why we're exhausted before the real work even begins. You weren't lazy, you were overdrawn. And it started with the lie that it's just a small thing. But small things break you, not all at once, but in the way waves erode stone, slowly, rhythmically, silently, until your days are filled with things that don't nourish you, don't challenge you, don't matter, yet they keep arriving. Because the more you say yes, the more the world assumes you always will. Your silence becomes permission. Your tired smile becomes a contract. And suddenly you're not deciding your schedule anymore. You're reacting to it. You're playing defense against your own life. And the idea of rest, of stillness, of staring out the window without guilt, that feels like rebellion. But let's be clear. This isn't about laziness, or boundaries, or time management hacks. This is about identity. Because every yes you give rewires what people expect of you. You become the reliable one, the go-to person, the one who always helps. And if you try to change that, try to reclaim your space, the world resists. It will call you selfish, difficult, distant. Because people don't miss your time. They miss your compliance. They miss how easy it was to borrow pieces of you. And you start to confuse burnout with failure. You feel guilty for needing breaks. You apologize for silence. You resent others for asking. Yet you still say yes. Not because you want to, but because the cost of no feels heavier than the weight you're already carrying. But here's what the time debt trap never tells you. Every no you speak now is a yes to a future you haven't met yet. A yes to deep work. A yes to peace. A yes to the version of you who isn't constantly gasping for space between tasks. And saying no doesn't make you unkind. It makes you honest. You are not a calendar. You are not a notification sender. You are not the sum of other people's needs. You are a person. And people need time to think, to rest, to reset. You need time for the invisible work. Processing, imagining, recovering. That's not optional. That's not a luxury. That's mental oxygen. And the world may never offer it freely, so you have to claim it, reclaim it. Because if you don't protect your time, someone else will spend it for you, and they won't spend it wisely. This isn't about doing less. It's about doing what matters. And what matters can't survive if you're booked solid, with obligations that feel like sandbags tied to your brain. The truth is, people will always ask. Platforms will always ping. Work will always expand to fill your silence. So, you must become deliberate. You must build a firewall made of no, not rude, not reactive, but clear. No, I can't meet today. No, I'm not available this weekend. No, I can't take on that task right now, because every no protects a sacred yes. A yes to focus. A yes to creativity. A yes to rest without guilt. A yes to presence with your work, your family, your thoughts. This isn't selfish. This is survival. And in a world addicted to more access, more availability, more yes, your refusal becomes revolutionary. You don't owe everyone your time. You don't have to earn rest. You are allowed to pause before responding, to weigh a request against your limits, to breathe, because time is not just minutes and meetings. Time is memory, meaning, life itself. And the more debt you carry, the less of yourself is left to live it. So the next time a small favor shows up at your door, pause, not because you don't care, but because you finally do. You care about what your time is becoming. You care about what your energy is shaping. You care enough to ask, is this obligation worth the cost? Because your time isn't free, and every yes you give is a piece of you don't get back. The future promise bait. You're told to hold on, just a little longer, that everything you're suffering through right now will be worth it someday, that the late nights, the sacrifices, the stress, the loneliness, the things you want but keep denying yourself, they're all part of a grand process, the promise, the climb, the investment into a future that shines just out of reach. Trust the journey, they say. The reward is coming. But what if it's not? What if the reward is the bait and your belief in it is the trap? This is the future promise bait, a psychological illusion where hope is weaponized, where you are given a vivid image of something better, brighter, freer. And that image is dangled just far enough ahead that you never quite catch it. And yet, just close enough that you keep walking. You suffer through a present that hurts, because the future has been painted so beautifully. You think you're working towards something real. You believe the goal is fixed. You believe your patience, your suffering, your effort, it all means something. But what if the finish line keeps moving? Oh, what if the goal isn't there to be reached, but to keep you moving? Think of the employee who works 12-hour days chasing a promotion that's always just 1 quarter away. Or the student who's told, get the degree and everything will be fine, only to graduate into debt, disappointment, and another layer of promises. Or the partner who waits for someone to finally be ready, ignoring years of avoidance, excusing emotional absence, because they said they'll change, just not yet. Or the citizen who is told, sacrifice now for a better future, year after year, decade after decade, while nothing improves, except the sophistication of the slogans. It happens slowly, quietly. You tolerate discomfort, then sacrifice, then pain. You keep saying, it's only temporary. You convince yourself this is the cost of greatness, of success, of love, of safety, of legacy. But at what point do you ask, who drew this map? Who benefits from me staying on this road? Because here's the truth. The more vividly the future is painted for you, the more numb you become to the present. You stop asking if you're okay, if you're happy, if this is what you want. You silence those questions because this isn't the time to ask them. You've been taught to defer everything, rest, joy, boundaries, healing, all postponed until after the reward arrives. But the reward is always scheduled for later. You get a raise, but your responsibilities increase. You get a degree, but the job market is worse than before. You get the relationship, but it doesn't feel like love. You get what you were promised, and it feels like less than nothing. And worse, you feel guilty for being disappointed. Because if you're not happy now, after all this effort, then maybe the problem is you. That's what the system wants you to think, that your discontent is a personal flaw, not a sign that you've been baited. But the truth is this: if a reward always requires more suffering to reach, it's not a reward, it's a leash. You were sold an image, and it worked because humans are visual, emotional creatures. The brain doesn't distinguish well between imagined rewards and real ones. If the future is described in just enough detail, your nervous system reacts as if it's already partway there. That's why it works. That's why you stay. The better the story, the longer you wait. But this is not a fair trade. This is not ambition. This is not hustle culture or resilience. This is psychological manipulation. The future promise. Bait exploits your deepest instinct, the willingness to endure discomfort for something meaningful. It hijacks that instinct, repackages it, and sells it back to you, without the meaning. You might say, but aren't some futures worth chasing? Yes, but not when they're used to blind you to the truth of the present, not when they're endlessly postponed, not when they demand that you abandon who you are now to become someone you never agreed to be. Real goals evolve with you. They don't guilt you. They don't vanish when you arrive. They don't require you to forget yourself in order to reach them. So, how do you break the bait? You stop running toward images, you start listening to your life right now. Not the fantasy of what it might be, but what it is. You begin asking, what am I sacrificing, and why? Who told me this was necessary? What do I gain if I stop chasing and start choosing? You stop tolerating present misery just because someone said it'll be worth it. You realize that worth is not something that arrives at the end. It is something you cultivate in every step. You take the power back from the people and systems that thrive on your patience. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Your suffering is profitable for someone. Your compliance is their convenience, and every day you wait for the reward, they win. This doesn't mean give up on dreams. It means reclaim them. Define them for yourself. Not in abstract terms like success or security or love, but in lived daily experience. What does peace feel like? What does connection look like? What does fulfillment sound like? And is any of that present now? Because if the answer is always not yet, then maybe the bait is still in your mouth. You deserve a life that doesn't begin after. Not after you're thinner, richer, smarter, married, promoted. You deserve a life that begins now, with choices made from clarity, not guilt, from truth, not pressure, from freedom, not fantasy. So, the next time someone offers you the world, but only if you suffer now, ask them, when exactly will it arrive? Ask them to name the date, the hour, the proof. Watch how vague their answers become. Watch how quickly the clarity fades, because the reward isn't real, the bait is. And your life is too valuable to waste chasing a promise that was never meant to be kept. The signal overload. ChatGPT said, you wake up and check your phone. Within seconds, you're hit by a dozen alerts. Breaking news, a friend's political rant, a fitness influencer's morning routine, an ad telling you what you should be doing, and a notification from a productivity app you downloaded in a moment of panic. Before your feet touch the ground, your mind has already been hijacked by noise. Not one voice, not two, but dozens. Each one screaming to be the signal, the truth, the one you should listen to. But when every voice claims authority, how do you know who to follow? This is the world of signal overload, a psychological state where you're so bombarded by conflicting instructions, opinions, warnings, promises, and headlines that your internal compass short-circuits. You begin to outsource your thinking. Not consciously, not because you're weak, but because your mental processing power is finite, and the noise never stops. In the past, a signal was something rare. A drumbeat in the distance meant danger. A voice in the village meant truth. A teacher, a leader, a parent. Clear voices limited in number. But now, the internet has weaponized volume. Everyone speaks. Every second. Every moment is a fire hose of guidance. Do this. No, don't. Believe me. Ignore them. Buy this. Stop that. Speak out. Stay quiet. Wake up. Relax. Work harder. Take a break. Meditate. Panic. This isn't information. It's a battle for your nervous system. And what happens when the brain receives too many signals? It stops evaluating them. It shifts from thinking to reacting. It stops asking, is this right? And starts asking, who seems sure? That's the trap. Signal overload doesn't just confuse you, it seduces you into giving up the wheel. Because when every path feels fogged with contradiction, the loudest voice becomes the safest. Not the most rational, not the most ethical, just the most certain. And so you follow influencers with blind confidence. You nod along to pundits who shout. You repost opinions that match your panic, not your values. You don't analyze, you absorb. This is how cults are built. Not in silence, but in storms. When life feels chaotic and no truth seems stable, charismatic certainty feels like oxygen. That's how misinformation spreads. That's how manipulation gains power. Not by making better arguments, but by making louder ones, simpler ones, repeated ones. In a sea of static, simplicity feels like salvation. And this doesn't just happen to other people. It happens in your inbox when one health expert says carbs are killing you, and another says you're starving your brain without them. It happens when one financial advisor screams, buy, and another whispers, run. It happens when two headlines sit side by side. one warning of a global crisis, the other dismissing it as a hoax. You're left with mental whiplash, and in the confusion, your critical thinking muscles weaken. You click the thing that makes you feel least uncertain, not most informed, least afraid. Signal overload feeds on your exhaustion, and decision fatigue is real. Studies show that after making too many choices, the human brain begins to default to the path of least resistance. It stops weighing options. It starts copying, mimicking, deferring. We're not built for infinite voices, we're built for clarity. But clarity has become a luxury. And here's the most dangerous part. Once you hand over your decision-making to someone else, you start mistaking their confidence for your own. You become a vessel, not a voice. You repeat. You defend. You argue for positions you never examined. Because the moment you stopped sorting signals, you became a relay tower for someone else's agenda. This is how manipulation thrives in the modern world. Not through silence, but through saturation. The architecture of your feed is not neutral. Algorithms prioritize engagement, not truth. They amplify controversy, not clarity. They serve you a buffet of opinions, designed not to enlighten, but to divide, to addict, to inflame. And you are the product. Not your data, your attention, your decisions, your internal autonomy. So, how do you survive signal overload? First, recognize the pattern. If you feel overwhelmed by information, if you find yourself jumping from belief to belief, if your opinions shift with whoever spoke last, it's not because you're weak, it's because you're overloaded. And overload is a form of control. Second, stop confusing noise with value. Confidence is not the same as wisdom. Simplicity is not always truth. The most attractive answer is often the most dangerous one, because it bypasses thought. Learn to pause when something feels too certain. Ask, why do I believe this? Who benefits if I follow this voice? Third, reintroduce friction. The modern world trains you to consume fast and decide faster. Break that loop. Slow your scroll. Disable your notifications. Read full articles, not just headlines. When you control the pace, you take back control of your signal space. Finally, rebuild your internal compass. Make time to think, alone, quietly, not to react, but to reflect. Because if your values, priorities, and goals aren't clear, someone else will gladly install theirs in your head. The truth is, most people aren't evil. Most voices aren't malicious, but intention doesn't matter when you're drowning. Even clean water can kill if you take in too much. Signal overload isn't just a side effect of modern life. It is the battlefield, and the prize is your agency. So ask yourself, when was the last time you made a decision without being influenced, without being nudged by urgency, panic, or someone else's certainty? The quiet answer to that question will tell you whether you're thinking clearly or just echoing the last loud voice that passed through your feed. Protect that silence. Protect your mind. Because in a world of infinite noise, stillness is rebellion. The transaction illusion. You walk into a store and someone smiles at you. Not just a polite smile, a warm, intentional one. They ask how your day is going. They offer you a free sample. Maybe they compliment your outfit or remember your name. It all feels nice, harmless. But beneath that surface warmth, something else is happening. A silent ledger has been opened. A transaction has begun. One you didn't agree to, one you didn't see coming. And suddenly you feel a quiet pressure to smile back, to say thank you, to listen, to buy something, even though you never asked for any of it. That's the transaction illusion. It's a psychological trap, so subtle it often passes unnoticed. The belief that every act of kindness, attention, or generosity, no matter how insincere or strategic, requires something in return. That if someone offers you something, even uninvited, you owe them. Your time, your attention, your agreement, your money, your loyalty, your guilt. And here's the terrifying part. The thing they gave you might not even be real. You didn't ask for their help. You didn't sign any contract. You didn't agree to the emotional exchange. But still, the pressure builds inside you like a weight, because your brain, socialized by thousands of years of human cooperation, hates imbalance. Reciprocity is wired into our biology. When someone does something nice for us, even if it's artificial, we feel compelled to repay them. It's a survival mechanism. In small tribes, mutual exchange built trust. In modern society, it builds manipulation. Let's look at an example you've likely seen before. A street vendor hands you a flower, just gives it to you, smiling. Free gift, they say. You hesitate, confused, but they insist. It's yours. The moment you accept it, the dynamic shifts. Now they ask for a donation, or try to sell you something else. And even though you know the flower cost them almost nothing, maybe it's plastic, maybe it's wilted, you feel a strange sense of guilt if you don't give them something in return. Why? Because the transaction illusion has taken hold. You were pulled into an invisible contract, not written, not signed, but felt. It's not just on the streets. It happens in relationships, workplaces, families, even in content you consume online. Someone compliments you, then expects loyalty. Someone offers unsolicited advice, then wants your time. A boss gives you freedom to manage your schedule, then uses it to guilt trip you when you need real time off. A friend listens to your problems once, then expects you to drop everything for them endlessly. In each case, the initial gift was not pure. It was bait, a setup, a positioning move, and now you feel caught, emotionally indebted to someone who engineered the whole situation. The transaction illusion is not just clever, it's dangerous. It makes you feel responsible for a debt you never chose. And when you don't repay it, you feel like you're the one being unfair. You feel selfish, ungrateful, cold. That's the emotional leverage this illusion thrives on. It reverses the power dynamic. Now, think deeper. Have you ever said yes to something? Not because you wanted to, but because you felt you owed it to someone who once helped you? Have you ever avoided saying no because someone once did so much for you? Have you ever felt uneasy walking away from a person or place that no longer serves you because of a favor they gave years ago? This is how the illusion survives, by twisting your moral compass, by whispering that even false generosity counts, that even manipulative giving deserves real repayment. It doesn't. But we struggle to separate the performance of kindness from its substance. That's what the illusion exploits. It weaponizes our sense of decency. And in a world increasingly structured around manufactured interactions, it's everywhere. In marketing, this offer is only available for 24 hours, just for you. In media, I gave you free content, now like subscribe, share, obey. In dating, I paid for dinner, now you owe me intimacy. In family, I raised you, so now you must do everything I say. The underlying message is always the same. I did this for you, now you do this for me. But in truth, the original act was never about you. It was about control. You see, genuine generosity doesn't come with a hook. It doesn't demand. It doesn't expect repayment. True kindness is complete in itself. It's given freely, without ledger, without strategy, without strings. The transaction illusion hijacks that principle and counterfeits it, so well that even you start to believe it. And when you believe it, you become vulnerable. Vulnerable to guilt trips, to boundary violations, to staying silent when you should speak, because you feel like saying no is a betrayal, like walking away is cruelty, like protecting yourself is selfishness. But here's what no one tells you. You are not obligated to repay an act you didn't ask for. You are not cruel for saying no to a favor framed as a trap. You are not ungrateful for noticing that the gift came with a hidden invoice. The transaction illusion only works when you forget that consent matters, not just in actions, but in emotional exchanges. A gift without consent is not a gift. It's pressure disguised as kindness. So, how do you escape this illusion? First, pause when you feel that rising guilt. Ask yourself, did I ask for this? Did I agree to this exchange? Is this act really about me or about how they want to be perceived? Then, hold the boundary, even when it feels uncomfortable, especially when it feels uncomfortable, because the cost of giving in to the illusion is far greater than the cost of resisting it. It's the erosion of your agency, your time, your energy, your clarity. The longer you participate in false exchanges, the harder it becomes to tell who you really are, outside of what others expect you to owe. You don't owe someone peace because they caused your war. You don't owe your silence because they once praised you. You don't owe yourself away just because someone offered something they never meant to give freely. In the end, the most radical act of self-respect is to see the illusion for what it is and walk away from the contract you never signed. Because not all generosity is genuine, and not all transactions are fair. The doubt implant. You remember what happened. You felt it. You saw it. You lived it. But now, days, weeks, or months later, someone tells you that's not how it happened, and not just once, over and over. You're misremembering. You're overreacting. You always twist things. At first, you defend yourself, but slowly, you begin to question. You rewind the memory in your mind again and again, trying to find the mistake. You hesitate. You get quiet. You begin to think, maybe they're right. That's how it starts, the doubt implant. It doesn't arrive with a bang. It's not loud or obvious. It's quiet, slippery, surgical, just a suggestion, a tilt of the head, a soft correction. But it burrows deep. Because the most effective manipulations aren't shouted, they're whispered, not forced, but planted. The human brain is designed to trust memory. It anchors our sense of reality, our sense of self. But memory isn't a hard drive. It's dynamic, flexible, vulnerable to influence. And that's what the manipulator knows. They don't have to rewrite your whole history. They just have to insert doubt. And once that seed is in your mind, your own brain does the rest. Questioning, unraveling, rewriting. Until one day, you're not even sure what happened. You only remember how they said it happened. It begins subtly. You recall an argument where you were hurt. But they say, I never said that. You bring up a broken promise, and they reply, you're imagining things. You express discomfort, and they say, you're always so sensitive. And slowly the ground beneath your memory begins to crack. This isn't a disagreement. It's psychological warfare. It's a method called gaslighting, named after a 1944 film where a husband manipulates his wife into doubting her sanity, lowering lights, moving objects, then denying it all. Today it happens in marriages, friendships, families, even workplaces. It's not just about controlling facts, it's about controlling reality. The manipulator's goal isn't to win a debate. It's to make you question your inner compass, because once you lose trust in your own perception, you'll lean on theirs. You'll need them to tell you what's real, what's safe, what's true, and they'll do it with a smile, with concern, with love. I'm just trying to help you understand. You always get confused. You're lucky I'm patient with you. These aren't compliments, they're chains, painted gold, and it works because your brain is wired for social coherence. When someone close to you insists that your memory is flawed, your mind begins to prioritize the relationship over accuracy. It thinks, if I keep defending myself, I'll lose their love, their approval, their presence. So you begin to silence yourself, not because you're wrong, but because your survival instinct chooses connection over truth. Over time, this creates a feedback loop. You hesitate to speak. You censor your memories. You second-guess your emotions. And the more you suppress, the more power they gain, until your own mind becomes a courtroom where every piece of evidence is cross-examined by their voice. You think, did I make that up? Was I too dramatic? Maybe I don't remember anything clearly anymore. And here's the cruelty of it all. Your instincts start warning you, but you stop listening. Your gut says something's off. But your trained mind says, no, I'm just being paranoid. That's the moment the doubt implant becomes fully operational. Because now, you're not just distrusting your memory, you're distrusting your intuition, your judgment, yourself. This is how control is maintained without chains, not through force, but through erosion. Not by silencing you, but by making you silence yourself. And let's be clear, this is not just emotional manipulation, it's psychological abuse. It fractures a person from the inside out. It doesn't leave bruises, it leaves echoes. Years after the relationship ends, you still flinch at your own thoughts, still hesitate to believe your own memories, still ask, what if it was all my fault? But here's the truth. It wasn't your fault. It was your trust that was weaponized, your honesty, your willingness to self-reflect. These are beautiful traits, but in the hands of a manipulator, they become tools of control. So, how do you break the implant? First, name it. Doubt is powerful only when it hides in ambiguity. When you say, this is gaslighting, you begin to see the pattern. And when you see the pattern, it loses its grip. Second, reclaim your memory. Write it down. Journal. Voice record. Create a private, unedited archive of your experience, not to prove it to them, but to remind yourself that you lived it, that your perception matters, that your truth is valid. Third, Build a witness circle. Find people who won't rewrite your story, people who listen without judgment, who believe you before analyzing you. Their presence can act as a mirror, reflecting the parts of you that were once dismissed or erased. And most importantly, trust your anger. Not the explosive kind, but the sacred kind. The kind that says, I know what I felt. I know what I saw. I don't need permission to remember. That anger isn't weakness. It's your mind trying to reconnect with its center. Don't numb it, follow it. You don't have to fight to prove your memory. You don't owe a debate to someone who weaponized your doubt. You owe something to yourself. You owe peace. You owe clarity. You owe the quiet power of looking back at your past and saying, I remember, and I believe me. Because the truth is, your memory is not broken. It was shaken. Your instincts are not defective. They were overridden, and your identity is not missing. It's just been buried beneath someone else's narrative. Now is the time to take it back, piece by piece, memory by memory, until you no longer need them to interpret your story, because the story was always yours. The surveillance pressure. You act differently when someone's watching. You sit straighter, speak softer, choose your words with more care. You become a version of yourself that's edited, sharpened at the edges, smoothed in the middle, less wild, less honest, less you. At first, it seems harmless. A camera on the street, a mic in the meeting, a comment section under your post, a tracking pixel in your email, but piece by piece that awareness, that hum of I'm being watched, starts to shape your behavior, quietly, relentlessly, until one day you realize you don't even know which parts of you were natural and which were constructed for the observer. This is the surveillance pressure, and it changes everything. Because it doesn't need guards or gates or orders. It only needs your awareness. Just the idea that someone might be watching you is enough to shift how you live. Psychologists call this the observer effect. The moment you know you're being seen, you adjust. Not consciously, not maliciously, but reflexively. Like flinching from a sudden noise. Like lowering your voice in a library. And that reflex is weaponized. In school, when the teacher walks by, you stop doodling and stare at your notes. At work, when the boss joins the Zoom call, your posture sharpens. Online, when you post something vulnerable, you feel the invisible eyes scanning it, judging, interpreting, screenshotting. Surveillance is no longer rare, it's constant. And it's not just cameras or devices. It's people, algorithms, entire systems that reward the curated and punish the authentic. So you adapt. You post what gets likes. You say what won't offend. You choose the safe opinion. You smile when you're tired. You produce instead of reflect. And slowly the performance becomes the identity. Not because you're fake, but because being real feels unsafe. You don't lie, but you omit. You don't conform, but you filter. You don't silence yourself, but you lower the volume just enough to fit the room. This isn't paranoia. This is conditioning, and it starts early. Children behave better when they know a teacher is watching. Workers take fewer breaks when a supervisor is nearby. People become more generous, more obedient, more moral when they believe they're being watched. Surveillance doesn't just record behavior, it reshapes it. But here's the twist. You're not being watched for your well-being. You're being watched for their benefit. The company, the system, the platform, the boss, the crowd. They're not monitoring you to protect your truth. They're shaping you to protect their power. Because a watched person is a manageable person, you're less likely to protest, less likely to rest, less likely to question. You become self-policing, a walking algorithm of compliance, because that's what constant visibility breeds, not transparency, not safety, but obedience. And it doesn't just happen in surveillance states. It happens in corporate cultures, in social media, in schools, in families, in friendships. Anywhere you feel the pressure to be palatable, there is surveillance. Anywhere you feel the need to shrink your truth so others won't be uncomfortable, there is surveillance. Anywhere your freedom is filtered through who might be watching, there is surveillance. And the tragedy? Over time, you internalize the watcher. Even when no one is there, you check yourself, monitor your voice, question your feelings. You carry the invisible gaze in your mind like a second skin. You become your own warden. And that's the ultimate success of surveillance. Not that it sees you, but that it trains you to self-correct, to self-doubt, to self-sacrifice. So you play nice. You make peace with injustice. You follow the script even when it chokes you. Not because someone forced you to, but because the pressure of being seen made you forget what it felt like to live unseen. And yet, there's something sacred in the unobserved moment, in a walk with no phone, a conversation with no witness, a dance in an empty room, a thought that doesn't need to be posted. That's where real identity lives. That's where your uncensored self breathes. And if you want to reclaim that self, if you want to escape the surveillance pressure, it doesn't start by hiding. It starts by choosing. To speak what's true even when it's not rewarded. To rest even when it looks unproductive. To express joy, grief, anger, wonder, without waiting for permission. Because freedom isn't found in invisibility. It's found in integrity, in refusing to let the watcher decide who you become. So the next time you feel the eyes, real or imagined, ask yourself, who am I performing for? And who would I be if they weren't looking? Because that version of you, the quiet one, the raw one, the brave one, is still in there. Unpolished, unmonitored, undeniably real. And the world doesn't need more polished versions of who you should be. It needs the rawness of who you are, especially when no one's watching. The emotion surge cycle. You think you're making clear choices, that your mind is sharp, your values intact, your reactions grounded. But then it begins. A praise, a smile, a small reward that makes you feel seen, elevated. Then, out of nowhere, a withdrawal, a cold look, silence, disapproval, just enough to make you wonder what you did wrong. And before you can make sense of it, warmth returns again. Affection, validation, relief floods in. You feel safe, for now. And so, the cycle begins. You are caught in a storm of alternating emotional highs and lows, and it's not random, it's designed. This is the emotion surge cycle, a psychological manipulation tactic that scrambles your internal compass by flooding you with intense, rapidly shifting feelings until you can no longer think clearly. You stop asking questions. You stop trusting your gut. You stop looking outward for truth and start looking inward for blame. And you do all this while clinging tighter and tighter to the very person or system that's keeping you unstable. It's not just emotional abuse, it's a neurological hijack. When you're suddenly praised, your brain releases dopamine. It feels good. You relax. You associate that person with safety. But then, without warning, you're criticized, or ignored, or punished in some subtle way. Your brain reacts with a cortisol spike, stress, confusion, panic, and then, just before you break, relief arrives. They're kind again, reassuring, rewarding. That dopamine rush returns, only now it's even more powerful because it followed fear. The contrast intensifies the reward, and soon your brain becomes addicted. Not to pleasure, but to the cycle. You're no longer chasing joy. You're avoiding pain. And worse, you don't even realize it's happening. This pattern is used everywhere, from toxic relationships to cult indoctrination, from controlling workplaces to manipulative marketing. Wherever someone wants control, they inject emotional unpredictability. Because when your feelings are constantly swinging, your critical thinking shuts down. You're not analyzing anymore. You're just reacting. And they know it. Think of the partner who showers you with affection, then disappears without explanation. The boss who praises your work, then humiliates you in front of others. The brand that flatters you, then tells you you're not good enough unless you buy more. Or the influencer who inspires you, then makes you feel ashamed, then inspires you again. Up, down, until the only constant is them. This isn't connection, it's control. And it works by destabilizing the one thing you need most, internal security. The ability to know what's real, to trust yourself, to anchor to logic, evidence, intuition. But when you're inside the emotion surge cycle, all that vanishes. Your nervous system is too overwhelmed to discern truth from manipulation. You don't ask, is this right? You ask, what did I do wrong? You don't question them, you question you. Because the pattern trains you to seek stability from them, and only them. That's the trap. The more they shake your emotional ground, the more you grip their hand, not out of love, out of survival. And slowly, you forget what it felt like to stand on your own. This tactic is especially dangerous because it doesn't always feel like abuse. It feels like intensity, passion, drama. It feels alive. You may even start confusing the emotional chaos with love, with meaning, with growth. You say things like, "We just have a deep connection," or "It's complicated," or "They bring out something in me no one else does." And maybe that's true. But maybe what they bring out is confusion, anxiety, regression, because real connection doesn't require chaos. Real love doesn't require instability. And real power never demands that you abandon your clarity. But in the emotion surge cycle, clarity is the first thing to go. Your mind becomes a fog of second-guessing, hoping, justifying, excusing. You rationalize their cruelty because you've tasted their kindness. You tell yourself they didn't mean it because you've seen them smile. You wait for the next high, and in doing so, you tolerate the lows. Not because you're weak, but because your nervous system is trapped in a loop. And breaking that loop isn't easy, because the cycle conditions you to believe that emotional intensity equals importance. You start believing that peace is boring, that calm means emptiness. You chase the drama, not because you want pain, but because it's become your measure of meaning. That's the tragedy. You lose the ability to feel safe in stability. So even when someone offers you genuine, steady love, you don't know how to receive it. So, how do you escape? First, name it. Call it what it is. Not love, not passion, not leadership, manipulation. Second, pause. When the surge hits, whether high or low, don't act. Don't respond immediately. Don't explain, don't apologize, don't chase. Just pause. Because the cycle thrives on reactivity. Your stillness is your power. Third, reconnect to your own rhythm. Journal, breathe, walk. Ask yourself, what do I feel when I'm alone and untouched by them? That answer will guide you back. Fourth, seek relationships in spaces that do not rely on chaos to feel real, where steadiness is not punished, where consistency is love, not control. And finally, forgive yourself. You didn't fall into the emotion surge cycle because you were foolish. You fell because you're human, because your brain is wired to respond to emotion, because you crave meaning and someone sold you intensity in its place. But now you see the pattern, and once you see it, you can choose differently. You can build a life that doesn't feel like a roller coaster, a life where peace is sacred, where love doesn't come at the cost of clarity, where your emotions are yours, not strings in someone else's hand. Because you were never meant to be a puppet for someone else's storm. You were meant to feel deeply, think clearly, and walk steadily, on your own terms. The authority costume. You see the uniform and you pause. You hear the title, doctor, professor, officer, CEO, and something in your mind leans forward, listens more carefully, hesitates to challenge. You assume knowledge. You assume power. You assume truth. But what if behind the badge, behind the clipboard, behind the certificate on the wall, there is nothing but performance? What if the authority isn't real, but you still obey? That's the power of the authority costume. We live in a world that trains us to associate symbols with safety. A white coat means medical expertise. A suit means leadership. A clipboard and calm tone mean control. And so, when someone wears these signals, we often surrender our skepticism. We lower our defenses, not because they've earned trust, but because they've dressed like someone who should be trusted. This isn't weakness, it's wiring. From childhood, we're conditioned to respond to signs of hierarchy. Parents, teachers, police officers, all reinforced with phrases like, listen to your elders, respect the rules, trust the system. And in many cases, this structure is necessary. It keeps chaos at bay. But when the symbol of authority is used as a disguise, when the costume replaces the credibility, you're not just being led, you're being manipulated. One of the most famous psychological experiments of all time proves this. In 1974, psychologist Stanley Milgram found that ordinary people were willing to deliver what they thought were deadly electric shocks to strangers, simply because a man in a lab coat told them to. That white coat wasn't proof of moral rightness. It was just fabric. But it worked like a spell. People obeyed even as the victim screamed. Why? Because the man looked like authority. That's the costume, and it hasn't gone away. In fact, it's become more powerful. Today, Anyone can put on the authority costume. A person online calls themselves a thought leader, slaps a PhD in their bio, edits a backdrop to look like a studio or clinic, and suddenly, people follow. They give advice on health, finances, relationships, politics, and because they sound confident and wear the right language, they gain influence. Not because their ideas are sound, but because they wear the right mask. This illusion is everywhere. Consider the guru industry. Motivational speakers with no credentials sell miracle solutions to complex problems. They stand on stages, wear microphones, flash graphs, and because they look like someone who knows what they're doing, people listen. People pay. People change their lives based on rehearsed theatrics, not verified substance. And it gets darker. In emergency situations, when panic clouds judgment, the costume becomes even more potent. Someone shows up with a reflective vest and a walkie-talkie during a disaster, and suddenly they're giving orders. People follow. They assume legitimacy because the moment demands quick obedience. But sometimes, those people are imposters, opportunists, or worse. And harm happens, not from aggression, but from unearned trust. The authority costume also hides inside corporations. The higher the floor of the office, the more unquestioned the decisions. People nod along to policies they know are flawed because the person proposing them is a senior executive vice president of strategy. They trust the title more than their instincts. And slowly, critical thinking dissolves because questioning authority feels risky. It makes you uncomfortable. It triggers fear. What if I'm wrong? What if they know something I don't? But that fear is exactly what the costume feeds on. Even in medicine, this effect is life-altering. Patients ignore their own symptoms, their own bodies, because a doctor with rushed words and a clipboard says, "It's nothing." Or worse, doctors themselves defer to more senior staff in critical moments, even when their gut screams otherwise. Studies have shown that this deference to hierarchy can lead to deadly errors. The costume becomes a muzzle. And now, in the age of digital personas, the authority costume has evolved again. Blue check marks, clean branding, titles like expert, strategist, consultant. These are pixels, not proofs. Yet, we believe them. We obey. We follow their diets, their philosophies, their predictions. And why? Because we've been conditioned to respect appearances over evidence. The danger isn't just in being misled. It's in losing the ability to question. When you grow too used to following symbols, you stop evaluating substance. You start accepting the most confident voice in the room as the right one. And over time, you forget how to think critically. You forget how to challenge. You forget how to say, I need more than a title. I need the truth. But not all authority is false. Not all symbols are hollow. The challenge is to distinguish real authority from theatrical authority. To recognize that the uniform doesn't make the person, but the actions, the knowledge, the accountability behind it. So, how do you escape the trap? First, become aware of the costume. When someone presents themselves as an expert, ask what backs that claim. Not just degrees, but results, logic, transparency. Real authority invites scrutiny. It doesn't hide behind symbols. Second, slow your obedience. When you feel yourself falling into automatic deference, pause. Ask, would I follow this person if they looked different, spoke differently, had no title at all? Third, restore your inner authority. You are allowed to question. You are allowed to seek second opinions. You are allowed to push back on polished certainty. True expertise respects inquiry. False authority punishes it. Finally, stop mistaking confidence for truth. Many of the worst decisions in history were led by people who looked the part, who spoke with assurance, who wore the costume flawlessly. But they weren't leaders. They were actors with an audience that forgot it had the right to walk out. The authority costume is not evil, it's neutral. But in the wrong hands, it becomes a tool of obedience, a cloak that silences the mind. And the only defense against it is your awareness. So, next time someone stands before you in the costume of power, ask yourself, not what do they look like, but what have they done? Not how loud do they speak, but how deeply have they earned trust? Because the truth doesn't need a costume to be heard. It just needs your attention. The manufactured consensus. You scroll through your feed, and there it is. A trending opinion, a viral take, a movement that everyone seems to support. Every post you see echoes the same message. The likes are in the thousands. Comments overflow with agreement. It feels like the entire world has made up its mind. And you hesitate. Maybe you don't fully agree. Maybe you have doubts. But suddenly, voicing those doubts feels dangerous, like stepping off a cliff while everyone else walks the other way. That's the power of the manufactured consensus. This isn't just about peer pressure, it's about a carefully constructed illusion that makes disagreement feel like isolation. It's about manipulating perception to create conformity, because when it looks like everyone believes something, your brain is wired to believe it too, even when it doesn't sit right. Social proof is a survival mechanism. In the wild, if the herd runs, you run. If the group avoids a food, you avoid it too. Evolution rewarded those who followed the crowd. And in the digital age, this instinct has been weaponized. What used to help us survive is now used to silence us. Think of how this plays out in online spaces. YouTube hides the dislike count. Instagram floods your page with content that aligns with popular opinions. News sites cherry-pick expert voices until dissenters feel like lunatics. Algorithms push what's trending, not what's true, but what's accepted. And slowly you begin to feel like your perspective doesn't belong. But here's the trick. That consensus, it's not always real. It's manufactured. It's curated by what you're shown and what you're not shown. It's engineered through repetition, through amplification, through silencing, through bots posing as real people, through influencers paid to support a stance, through comment sections purged of dissent, through headlines designed to echo, not inform. It creates a psychological mirage that everyone agrees. And when you believe that, two things happen. First, you suppress your own thoughts, not because you changed your mind, but because speaking up feels unsafe. And second, you become more likely to adopt the consensus, not out of logic, but fear. Fear of being excluded, fear of being labeled difficult, regressive, stupid, or worse. The manufactured consensus thrives on this fear. In totalitarian regimes, it's called forced unanimity. In modern culture, it's sold as unity. But the effect is the same. It replaces genuine debate with performative agreement. It erases the complexity of real thought and replaces it with mass obedience. Quiet, smiling, nodding. Remember the experiments of Solomon Asch? He showed that people would agree with a clearly wrong answer just because everyone else did. That's the power of perceived agreement. Your brain doesn't want to risk being the outlier. It doesn't want ridicule. It wants safety. And safety, it believes, lies in numbers. So, when you see a controversial opinion with thousands of likes, remember this. That number isn't truth. It's strategy, a presentation of truth, a suggestion of correctness. And often, it's manipulated. Politicians know this. So do brands, so do authoritarian systems, so do influencers. If you can create the illusion that a belief is universal, you don't need to argue for it. You just need to show it enough times, and people fall in line. Now, imagine this in your personal life. In group chats, at work, in your family. You hesitate to question something because everyone else seems fine with it. But are they? Or are they also performing the same hesitation, the same fear, the same doubt? It's a chain of silence, each person afraid to be the first to break it. And that's how the manufactured consensus maintains power. It doesn't need to convince you. It only needs to make you feel alone in your conviction. But you're not. History is filled with stories of people who resisted false consensus. Whistleblowers, reformers, scientists, artists, leaders. They were all, at some point, the lone voice in the room. The one who said, "Wait, this doesn't make sense." The one who was called crazy or difficult or wrong until they weren't. The truth doesn't always wear a crowd, and lies often do. So, what can you do? You start by noticing. When you feel that pressure to agree, ask, is this consensus real or is it staged? Am I agreeing because I believe it or because I don't want the consequences of standing apart? Then, you listen for silence. Not the silence of agreement, but the silence of those too afraid to speak. They're there, waiting, watching, wondering if they're the only one. And sometimes all it takes is one voice to break the illusion. One voice to say, I don't think that's true. One voice to ask, where is the proof? One voice to question the story that's being repeated without question. That voice can be yours, because the most dangerous thing about the manufactured consensus isn't that it spreads lies. It's that it erases truth, not by argument, but by omission. And if you don't resist it, it begins to erase you too. So, next time you feel like the only one who sees the cracks, speak. The illusion only survives in silence. The consistency trap. ChatGPT said, you say something once, in a conversation, a post, a moment of certainty. You believe it then, or maybe you're still figuring it out, but the words leave your mouth or your keyboard, and now they exist, fixed, quoted, remembered. And from that moment on, the world holds you to it. But you said, that's not what you believed last time. You used to think differently. And suddenly your past becomes a prison, a sentence you didn't know you were serving. This is the consistency trap. The quiet pressure to remain the person you once presented, even if you've changed, even if you've grown, even if new evidence has shattered what you thought was true. And the more public your voice becomes, the more visible your thoughts, the harder the trap clamps down. Because consistency, we're told, is virtue. Flip-flopping is weakness. Changing your mind is betrayal. But why? Why do we treat changing one's mind as a flaw when it's often the truest sign of intelligence, humility, and maturity? Because the world rewards predictability. Employers, followers, friends, families, they feel safer when you're the same version of yourself they first met. You become easier to categorize, simpler to deal with, more useful. You serve their memory of you. And if you shift, they feel betrayed, not because you wronged them, but because you broke their mental model. You reminded them that people evolve, and evolution is uncomfortable to witness, especially in others. So the trap is set. Stay the same or face scrutiny, and you learn, often without realizing it, to hide your shifts. You silence the doubt. You shrink new ideas. You keep wearing an outdated belief like a mask that no longer fits, just to avoid the confrontation of saying, I was wrong. Think about it. A political stance you once took confidently now feels naive, but someone pulls out the old tweet, the screenshot, the memory, and suddenly, you're forced to explain not your new thinking, but why you dared to think differently at all. Or maybe it's smaller. You used to joke a certain way, dress a certain way, think a certain way about life, love, gender, work, purpose. But now, something shifted. Experience has refined you. Pain has reoriented you. Wisdom has softened you. But the people around you, the ones who benefited from the old you, aren't ready for the update. So, they pull out the past and hold it up like a contract. This is who you said you were. And the worst part of you agrees with them. Because your brain wants to be consistent too. It craves coherence. It wants to believe it's always been right. This is called cognitive consistency bias, a mental shortcut that pressures you to align new beliefs with old ones, just to avoid the discomfort of contradiction. Even when the evidence says otherwise, your mind whispers, but then what does that say about me? So you stay trapped. You keep defending ideas you no longer fully believe. You keep showing up as a version of yourself that's easier for others to accept. You keep nodding along with beliefs that your soul has outgrown, just to preserve the illusion that you're still the same. But here's the deeper truth. You're not meant to be consistent. You're meant to be responsive, flexible, honest. Evolution isn't betrayal, it's biology. Every cell in your body is different from 7 years ago. Your skin regenerates, your bones rebuild, your neurons rewire. So why is it so shameful that your mind does the same? The fear isn't really about inconsistency. It's about rejection. That if you change, you'll lose your tribe, your place, your identity. But real identity isn't about repeating yourself. It's about refining yourself. And the people who truly love you, the ones who value your truth over your performance, they won't punish your growth. They'll respect it, even if they don't always agree. We live in a culture that punishes contradiction. Politicians lose credibility for changing positions, even when the new position is wiser. Public figures are called out for past beliefs, even when they have apologized, learned, transformed. But imagine if we rewarded change, if we honored people not for being stubborn, but for being courageous enough to say, I no longer believe what I used to, and here's why. Imagine if the real strength wasn't in doubling down, but in letting go. So, here's your permission. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to grow beyond the things you once swore by. You are allowed to revise your story in the middle of the chapter. You are allowed to become someone new, not because you were fake before, but because you are more real now. Next time someone says, "But you used to think," you can look them in the eye and say, "Yes, and I outgrew that. Yes, and I was wrong. Yes, and I've learned more." That's not weakness, that's integrity. Consistency without truth is just repetition. But growth, that's where the real honesty lives. So step out of the trap, speak your updated truth, and never apologize for becoming more whole. The apathy erosion. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no loud crash, no dramatic moment of collapse, just a slow dimming. You used to care. You used to fight back, challenge things, question them, speak up when something felt wrong. But now, you catch yourself saying, "It's not worth it." You feel the weight of the same argument before it's even spoken. You sigh instead of standing, shrug instead of speaking. Not because you agree, but because you're tired. This is the apathy erosion, not a sudden loss of will, a gradual, relentless wearing down of your spirit, one micro-conflict at a time. You know the type, the coworker who always undermines you with a smile, the system that keeps changing the rules, just enough to frustrate, never enough to justify a fight. The endless justifications, the circular conversations, the fake apologies, the gaslight then reset rhythm that makes you question your own intensity. It chips at you every single day. At first, you push back. You explain, you argue, you try to fix it. You believe effort will lead to change, but then nothing happens. Or worse, your resistance is met with more resistance, with defensiveness, with subtle retaliation, or blank stares. So you adapt. Not because you're wrong, but because you're exhausted. You start choosing your battles, then you stop choosing altogether. And soon, you're not resisting, you're enduring. And enduring too long breeds numbness. But here's what no one tells you. Apathy is not the opposite of passion. It is what happens to passion when it's mishandled, mocked, ignored. It is the residue of care that wasn't allowed to matter. Think about how this plays out in your life. You raise your voice once in a meeting. You're told to calm down. You question a policy. You're labeled difficult. You ask for fairness. You're met with silence. So, eventually your brain makes a trade. Peace over principle. Numbness over noise. Because conflict without resolution doesn't just frustrate, it erodes. Psychologists call it learned helplessness. When an organism is exposed to repeated uncontrollable stress, it stops trying to escape, even when escape is possible. Dogs in a cage with a shock floor eventually lie down, even if the door is open. Not because they like the pain, but because their effort never changed anything. Sound familiar? Now transfer that to your relationships, your workplace, your society. Every time you resist and it goes nowhere, your brain records it, stores it, and eventually whispers, "Why bother?" That's the voice of erosion. It's quiet, seductive, logical. Why speak when they won't listen? Why care when nothing changes? Why object when you'll just be seen as the problem? So you stop. And the world loves when you stop. Because apathetic people are manageable. They don't protest. They don't demand. They don't disrupt. They become spectators in their own lives. And here's the cruel trick. The more apathetic you become, the more the system uses that against you. It treats your silence as consent, your stillness as agreement, your fatigue as approval. But your silence wasn't born of indifference. It was carved from exhaustion. So, how do you fight that? How do you resist when you barely have the energy to keep standing? You begin where erosion began, in the micro. Not with grand acts of defiance, but with the smallest act of remembering what you care about. You remember what made you angry before you were tired. You remember what felt unfair before you felt numb. You remember what you used to fight for, not because you expect a different result, but because resistance is the point. Apathy is not cured by victory. It is cured by integrity, by refusing to let your soul be shaped by how others treat it. So maybe you don't win the argument. Maybe the system doesn't change. Maybe the relationship doesn't improve. But you don't disappear. You reclaim 1 inch of yourself, then another. You say no, even if your voice shakes. You speak truth, even if it echoes. You resist, not for their sake, but for yours. Because the opposite of erosion is presence. It's showing up, even when your body says stay down. It's remembering that quiet endurance is not the same as peace. That agreement bought through exhaustion is not consent. That numbness is not the final state. It is the warning. So when you feel yourself checking out, fading back, giving up, stop, breathe, and ask, is this who I want to become? Because apathy doesn't arrive with a bang. It arrives in sighs, in silence, in the 1,000 tiny times you swallow yourself just to get through the day. And if you don't interrupt it, you don't just lose the argument. You lose yourself. But if you do interrupt it, if you whisper no where you once stayed quiet, you begin to rebuild. Not all at once, but piece by fragile piece, and the world may not change. But you will. The mirror validation. ChatGPT said, you begin with a full mirror, one that reflects all of you. The boldness, the flaws, the confusion, the kindness, the contradictions. You see yourself, messy but whole. But then, someone steps in, and slowly, without you noticing, they place filters over the glass. They smile only when you say certain things. They praise you only when you behave a certain way. They ignore your depth, your anger, your uncertainty, and without realizing it, you start editing yourself to match their reflection. This is the mirror validation trap, a subtle but devastating psychological mechanism in which your self-worth becomes tethered to the approval of someone who only reflects back fragments of who you are, the pieces they find acceptable, the parts they can use, the traits they want to amplify, not for your wholeness, but for their comfort, their agenda, their control. It doesn't begin with cruelty. It begins with attention, maybe even affection. They compliment your humor, but go silent when you show sadness. They love your ambition, but pull away when you rest. They admire your beauty, but recoil when you assert boundaries. And so, unconsciously, you start shaping yourself to fit what they reward. You laugh louder, you hide your grief. You work harder. You please. You please. You please. Not because you're weak, because you're human, because connection matters. And your nervous system registers approval as safety. When someone offers you a positive reflection, your brain releases dopamine. You feel seen, valued, real, and that feeling is addictive. So when they withhold it, you chase it. Not the truth, not freedom, just that hit of reflected worth. And soon, the original mirror, the full one you used to see yourself in, begins to fade, replaced by a thinner, curated version. One that distorts you, that edits out your needs, that shrinks your voice, that turns your complexity into a performance. You become a highlight reel of the parts they have chosen to mirror. And this is where the danger lies, because the more you rely on selective reflection, the less access you have to your real self. You start doubting your instincts. You wonder if you're lovable when unfiltered. You hesitate to express the parts they ignore, because what if you lose the only approval you've come to trust? They don't have to insult you or punish you. They just have to reflect silence where once there was warmth, withhold a glance, change their tone, pull their energy, and you, desperate to be mirrored again, adjust. You soften the parts they find too much. You sharpen the ones they reward, until what's left isn't you. It's a version of you carved by someone else's gaze. And the worst part? You call it love. You tell yourself, they bring out the best in me. But maybe what they bring out is the most acceptable in you. Maybe what they love isn't you. It's their influence over you. Because real love doesn't require you to fragment yourself. It doesn't demand that you shrink to fit someone else's mirror. But mirror validation does. It's used by manipulative partners, narcissistic parents, controlling mentors, image-obsessed cultures, anyone who benefits from you, confusing their approval with your identity. And it's not always loud. Sometimes it's subtle, a comment, a glance, a shift in energy, 1,000 unspoken cues that train you to become someone they can tolerate, but not someone you can recognize. And over time, you lose the ability to validate yourself. You look to them for every signal. Did I say the right thing? Do they still like me? Was I too much? You forget how to be, unless they're watching, unless they're reflecting. And this is how control is built. Not through violence, through editing, through slow, careful sculpting of who you're allowed to be. So, how do you reclaim the mirror? You break it. Not all at once, but piece by piece. You start by noticing the parts of yourself you've hidden, the parts you silence around them, the parts you miss. You ask, when did I stop being that version of me? Who told me it wasn't welcome? You remember your wholeness. You practice expressing the unapproved, not to provoke, but to free yourself. And then comes the hardest part. You learn to sit with disapproval. You let them frown. You let them withdraw. You let them ignore the parts they don't like. And instead of collapsing, you stand. You realize their silence no longer defines your worth. Their discomfort is not your cue to disappear. And in that space, scary and new, you begin to see yourself again. Not the filtered version, not the edited script, but the raw, honest, tangled you. And you realize, I am still here. I was never erased, just hidden, just dimmed. And now, I'm returning. Because the truth is, you were never supposed to be someone else's reflection. You were meant to be a mirror unto yourself, unconditional, whole, shatterproof. The learned helplessness. You try once, it doesn't work. You try again, fail. You push harder, think smarter, beg louder, and still the door doesn't open. The system doesn't change, the pain doesn't stop. Eventually, you stop trying. Not because you're lazy, not because you're weak, but because somewhere deep in your brain, a silent decision has been made. Nothing I do matters. And so, you surrender. You sit still in an open cage. You endure what once you would have fought. This is not depression. This is not defeat. This is something colder, engineered hopelessness. This is learned helplessness. Originally discovered through a grim experiment in the 1960s, psychologists Martin Seligman and Stephen Meyer exposed dogs to electric shocks they couldn't escape from. At first, the animals resisted, barking, struggling, trying to flee. But as the shocks continued without relief, something broke. The dogs lay down and accepted the pain. And later, when the door to freedom was literally open, they didn't even try to leave. They had been trained to believe there was no point in acting. Now look around. Isn't that what the modern world does to us? You apply for jobs and hear nothing. You speak up in broken systems and watch nothing change. You vote, protest, complain, strive, stretch, and still find yourself circling the same grind. The price goes up. The rules get harsher. The voice on the other end says, sorry, that's just policy. And with every failed attempt to reclaim control, your spirit quietly rewires itself. It whispers, why bother? That whisper becomes a belief. That belief becomes a behavior. And that behavior, inaction, is exactly what those in power want. Because a person who still believes they can change things is dangerous. A person who's been convinced they can't is predictable, contained, harmless. The engine of learned helplessness is not just failure, it's repetition. It's the design of systems that frustrate, confuse, and punish effort. It's a bureaucracy that sends you in circles. It's a legal process that takes years to acknowledge truth. It's the job market where qualifications mean nothing without connections. It's a healthcare system where survival depends more on paperwork than on pain. And over time, you don't need a cage, you carry it in your mind. This happens in classrooms. A student fails repeatedly not because they lack intelligence, but because the teaching never fit their brain. Eventually, they stop trying, stop raising their hand. They internalize failure as identity. Not I failed, but I am a failure. It happens in abusive relationships, where every attempt to assert yourself is met with gaslighting, ridicule, or punishment. You try to speak, get silence. You try to leave, get pulled back with apologies or threats. So eventually you stop trying at all. You shrink. You fold into yourself. Because every action feels like futility. And it happens in nations. In entire cultures taught to expect nothing better. Generations of people trained by poverty, war, or injustice to lower their expectations so far that hope itself feels ridiculous. These aren't apathetic people. They are wounded people, trained over time to see pain as permanent. Learned helplessness is not a flaw in your character. It's a response to environmental conditioning. And often that conditioning is intentional because helpless people don't rebel. They don't organize. They don't disrupt. They blame themselves. They whisper, Maybe I'm just not cut out for this. Maybe I'm the problem. That's how power stays in place. Not by locking the doors, but by convincing you they were never meant to open. But here's what makes this so insidious. Even when the situation changes, the belief does not. Seligman's dogs were placed in new environments with easy exits, and still they stayed. Not because they couldn't leave, but because they believed they couldn't. That belief was stronger than reality, and you've probably felt this too. The job offer comes, but you're too paralyzed to take the risk. The good person appears, but you push them away, convinced you're undeserving. The opportunity rises, but your hand doesn't move, because your past taught you that nothing good comes from trying. And in that moment, the conditioning has won. So how do you undo it? First, you must name it. You have to see your inaction not as laziness, but as learned paralysis. You weren't born defeated. You were programmed through patterns of failure and neglect. Recognizing that is power. Second, take back control in microscopic ways. Because learned helplessness feeds on scale, it convinces you the mountain is too high, the system too vast. But freedom starts with tiny rebellions, sending the email, speaking up once, saying no, saying yes. Each act tells your nervous system, I have agency. Third, surround yourself with people who remind you of your power. Not people who cheer blindly, but people who see you and reflect the truth that your past is not your destiny. Community is the antidote to isolation, and isolation is where helplessness thrives. And finally, forgive yourself. For the days you didn't try, for the doors you didn't open, for the times you gave up. That wasn't weakness, it was survival. But now that you see the cage, you can choose to step beyond it. Because the greatest lie learned helplessness teaches is this: you are alone and you are stuck. But you're not. You are watching this now, hearing this now, which means the light is still on somewhere inside you. The cage door may be open or maybe not, but either way, your will is still alive. Maybe bruised, maybe scared, but alive. And that's enough. Enough to stand. Enough to try again. Enough to whisper back to the voice that told you nothing you do matters. Watch me. The information flood. You open your phone, and before you even take a sip of coffee, you've seen 10 headlines, 4 breaking news updates, 3 contradictory statistics, 2 emotional videos, and a dozen people yelling at each other in the comments. You haven't even stood up yet, but your brain is already drowning. That's not an accident. That's the information flood. In a world designed to keep you scrolling, silence is the enemy. Stillness is dangerous, so you're never allowed to catch your breath. You are bombarded, hour by hour, second by second, with more information than any human in history was ever meant to process. Not just facts, but opinions disguised as facts, emotions dressed as logic, stories, images, outrage, clickbait, contradiction. The signal and the noise blended into one never-ending wave. And at first, you try to keep up. You skim, you save articles for later. You try to Google the truth. You fact-check the meme, question the source, wonder who's right. But the next wave comes before you finish. Then another, and another. Until your critical mind shuts down, not out of laziness, but fatigue. Deep cognitive fatigue. You're not stupid. You're overwhelmed. This is the real goal of the information flood. It's not to inform you. It's to exhaust you. Because when people are exhausted, they stop questioning. When they're overloaded, they stop verifying. The mind seeks relief, simplicity. And so, it grabs onto the nearest narrative, not the truest, not the most nuanced, just the one that's easiest to understand and emotionally satisfying. Something that explains the chaos in one neat sentence, one post, one villain, one tribe, one truth. It's not about convincing you logically. It's about overwhelming you emotionally until your defense mechanisms surrender. The result? You fall into mental autopilot. You start repeating things you didn't verify, believing headlines without reading the article, trusting influencers over experts, sharing emotional posts that feel right even if they're wrong. And you're not alone. Millions do the same because the brain, when under siege, seeks shortcuts, and those shortcuts become beliefs. Unquestioned, unchallenged, unverified. This is how propaganda spreads in the digital age, not through silence, but through noise, not by hiding the truth, but by burying it, It's like trying to find one clear voice in a stadium full of screaming people. Eventually, you give up. You just listen to the person next to you. And if they seem confident, you assume they know what they're talking about. But confidence isn't truth. Volume isn't proof. Popularity isn't accuracy. And yet, in the flood, those are the signals we begin to trust. Not because we want to, but because our brains are desperate to make sense of the chaos. The information flood hijacks your survival instincts. In prehistoric times, if something made you afraid, you paid attention. If something triggered your tribe loyalty, you trusted it. If something confused you, you looked to others. Those instincts kept you alive in a world of danger. But in the modern world, they make you manipulable. The more overwhelmed you are, the more predictable you become. And in a world run by algorithms, predictability is profit. Think of how quickly narratives spread now. A single tweet can rewrite history. A single out-of-context video can destroy a life. A graph, stripped of source, nuance, or method, can shape national policy. And because it's all wrapped in emotion, it bypasses your filters. You don't process it, you feel it. And that's enough. Even your memory gets distorted. You start recalling events based on how they were framed, not how they actually happened. You remember the rage, the fear, the certainty, but not the facts. And every time you repeat the story, it gets a little more simplified, a little more biased, a little more wrong. This isn't just misinformation, it's mind fatigue, and it's everywhere. On the news, where each segment is louder, faster, and more dramatic than the last. On social media, where endless content scrolls past your eyes before your brain can even tag it as true or false. In political discourse, where complexity is death and slogans are survival. In everyday conversations, where we no longer debate, we quote, we repost, we react. And slowly we stop thinking. Not because we've lost the ability, but because we've lost the space. The space to reflect, to breathe, to analyze, to ask, is this true? Do I know enough? What's being left out? Because that space is flooded. And in the flood, the strongest swimmers aren't the smartest, they're the loudest. So what do? You stop trying to drink the whole ocean. You pick a drop and study it deeply. You learn to say, I don't know yet. You learn to ask, who benefits if I believe this? You learn to notice. Why do I feel afraid, angry, euphoric, or smug after reading this? You learn to resist the urge to react. Because your attention is precious. Your doubt is powerful. Your skepticism is not weakness. It's your immune system against manipulation. In the flood, staying dry isn't possible, but you can learn to float. You don't have to know everything. You just have to stay awake, because the information flood doesn't drown you with lies. It drowns you with too much truth to sort. And if you don't pause, someone else will choose which truth survives. The selective transparency. They tell you just enough. Enough to seem honest. Enough to feel close. Enough to lower your guard. They offer a confession, a secret, a personal flaw. And in that moment, it feels real, vulnerable, like connection, like trust. You think, why would they admit that if they had something to hide? But that's exactly the point. They don't hide everything, just the parts that matter. This is not openness, it's strategy. And you're not gaining their trust, you're being disarmed. This is the illusion of honesty, a tactic known as selective transparency, where manipulators reveal certain truths, strategically chosen, to appear vulnerable while concealing the information that would expose their true intentions. It's not a lie, it's a half-truth. A crafted version of reality that earns your trust while keeping their leverage intact. It's like seeing a jigsaw puzzle with a few key pieces missing. The picture looks almost complete, so you assume you understand the whole story. But what's hidden in those missing fragments changes everything. Here's how it works. The manipulator chooses what to show you based on what you need to hear to believe them. If you're suspicious, they reveal something small, something slightly damaging. A story about a past mistake, a personal weakness, an emotional struggle. It seems brave. It seems honest. But it's a trade, a performance. One calculated to buy your trust with a carefully controlled dose of apparent vulnerability. Imagine this. Someone admits they cheated in a past relationship. They look ashamed. They seem sincere. And you think, they're being real with me. But what they don't say is that they've done it more than once, or that they're still in contact with the person they cheated with, or that they're subtly grooming your forgiveness in advance. What they shared wasn't the full truth. It was the most believable fraction of it. Selective transparency works because it plays on one of the deepest assumptions in human psychology, that people who admit faults must be trustworthy. We're conditioned to see confession as proof of integrity, but confession can also be a mask, a shield. And when used with intent, it's not vulnerability. It's manipulation disguised as honesty. You see it in toxic relationships. The partner who cries and says, "I know I messed up. I just have trouble with anger. It's how I was raised." And you believe them because it's personal, because they seem broken, because it makes sense. But what you don't see is the rest of the pattern. The blame shifting, the gaslighting, the denial of your pain, the hidden behaviors they never mention. You think they're being transparent, but they're not showing you their truth. They're showing you just enough to reset your empathy. You see it in workplaces. The boss who says, "I'm under pressure too. I'm doing my best." But they never tell you about the meetings where they throw you under the bus, or the promotions they promised you while offering the same words to others. Their partial truths build a story where they seem human, relatable, even supportive, while the core betrayal stays hidden behind polished language and practiced humility. And you see it in families. Parents who say, "We did everything for you," while refusing to acknowledge the emotional neglect or subtle cruelty that shaped you. They reveal just enough sacrifice to demand your loyalty, while concealing the damage they don't want to face. You're left feeling guilty for questioning them, because they opened up, didn't they? But understand this. Transparency is only honest when it risks something real, when the truth revealed could actually change the dynamic, when it's not rehearsed, not managed, not filtered. Selective transparency, by contrast, is always safe for the manipulator and disorienting for you, because it mixes truth with omission. And omission is the most dangerous kind of lie, because it leaves you unsure of what you missed. This is why you feel confused after talking with them, why something feels off, even when nothing seems overtly wrong. It's because you've been given 80% of the truth, and that last 20%, the missing pieces, are the ones that would have changed your entire understanding. They didn't lie, but they didn't let you see. Over time, this creates a psychological trap. You begin to doubt your instincts, because everything they say sounds honest. They seem reflective. They admit fault. They apologize sometimes. So when your gut says something doesn't add up, you silence it. You gaslight yourself. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. They told me the truth. But did they? Or did they tell you a version of the truth that kept you loyal, confused, and manipulable? Real transparency feels different. It's often awkward, unpolished, messy. It doesn't come neatly packaged in rehearsed vulnerability. It risks rejection. It doesn't aim to control your perception. It offers you the full picture and lets you decide. But selective transparency? That's a mirror angled just right to show what flatters them, and nothing more. So, how do you protect yourself? Start by noticing patterns, not confessions. Watch what they do when the full truth would cost them something. See how often their honesty buys them sympathy without accountability. Ask yourself, what are they not saying? Not in a paranoid way, but in a grounded, alert way. Pay attention to the silences between their words. And most importantly, validate your discomfort. If something feels off, it probably is. Not because you're broken, but because your intuition has detected a gap between the story they're telling and the truth they're hiding. Selective transparency is a magician's trick, a sleight of hand. They make you look at what's revealed, so you don't notice what's missing. Don't be distracted by the confession. Ask for the whole story. And if they can't give it, walk away knowing that withholding truth is just another form of control, one that sounds like honesty, but smells like manipulation. The reframing cascade. It starts subtly, a shift in tone, a change in emphasis, a detail omitted here, a new one added there. You remember what happened one way, but now they're telling it differently. Not drastically, just enough. Just enough to make you question, was it really like that? Did I overreact? Did I misunderstand? This is the reframing cascade, and it is one of the most dangerous psychological manipulations in modern life, because it doesn't attack your memory, it rebuilds it. One reinterpretation at a time, The cascade begins when someone, an individual, a group, a system, decides the truth isn't working in their favor. So they don't lie, not directly. They reframe. They take the raw event and wrap it in context, explanation, emotion, until it no longer resembles what actually happened, but what should have happened, according to them. You say you were hurt by a comment. They say you're being too sensitive. You bring up a broken promise. They say you misunderstood the terms. You recall the tension, the tone, the silence. They say you're imagining it. And you don't notice the erosion at first, because each new frame sounds almost reasonable. It gives them the benefit of the doubt. It softens the harsh edges of the moment. But over time, those new frames start to pile up. They form a mosaic, a false history, one that always paints them in a lighter shade and paints your reactions as distorted, overblown, incorrect. And the most dangerous part? It's convincing. Because the brain loves narrative, it seeks coherence. It wants things to make sense. So, when someone offers you a version of the story that's easier, cleaner, more emotionally palatable, you're tempted to take it, even if it's not true. This is how people stay in toxic relationships, how abusive workplaces are normalized, how entire cultures rewrite history, because repetition creates reality. Say it enough times, and a new version of truth begins to calcify, not because it's factual, but because it's familiar. This is the cascade. It starts with one reframing, then another, until you're surrounded by a version of reality where the truth is distorted just enough to silence your instincts, but not enough to trigger your alarm. And soon, you don't just question them, you question yourself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I just need to let it go. But here's the terrifying twist. You're not weak for believing them. You're human. Because your brain is wired to trust social cues, to integrate new information, to seek harmony with those around you. That's what kept us alive in tribes. That's what made us adaptable. But in the wrong hands, that adaptability becomes a weapon, not of force, but of suggestion. And what does it cost you? Your clarity, your voice, your ability to say, no, that's not how it happened. And I remember it clearly. But in the cascade, clarity is replaced with doubt. Facts are replaced with narratives, and narratives, they serve the storyteller. So ask yourself, who's doing the framing? Who's controlling the version of events you're being fed? And who benefits from the version you've started to believe? Because this isn't just about individual memory. This is about collective memory, about how institutions reframe injustice as necessity, how corporations reframe exploitation as opportunity, how leaders reframe abuse as discipline, and how, over time, we stop calling it what it is, because we've been taught to call it something else. Surveillance becomes safety. Silence becomes respect. Submission becomes maturity. And the lie gets repeated until it looks like wisdom. But here's how you fight the cascade. You hold the original frame. You protect it. Write it down. Speak it out. Preserve it before it's edited, softened, dissolved. Because reframing thrives in forgetfulness, but it falters in documentation. It breaks in the presence of people who remember, who refuse to let their memory be outsourced, who refuse to let their story be told by someone who broke it in the first place. You are not irrational because you remember differently. You are not dramatic because you refuse the new version. You are not wrong because you still feel the bruise they insist never happened. You are whole, and your memory, your felt experience, is valid. So when they say, that's not what I meant, you say, but that's what it did. When they say, you're misremembering, you say, I'm just refusing to forget. Because your memory is not a blank canvas for someone else to paint over. It is a record. It is a warning. And sometimes, it is all you have left of the truth. Guard it like it matters. Because in a world full of curated narratives, the raw, unfiltered version is a rare and radical thing, and you have every right to protect it from the cascade, the hope withholding. You tell yourself to be patient, that change takes time, that healing isn't linear, that maybe they're just under pressure, that you should hold on, because look, didn't they say something sweet yesterday? Didn't they finally apologize, even if only halfway? Didn't they almost follow through? Didn't it feel real for just a moment? And so you wait. You hope. You stay. This is the hope withholding trap, a devastating psychological manipulation where just enough kindness, affection, or progress is shown to keep you emotionally tethered, but never enough to make you feel truly safe, chosen, or secure. The illusion is always just bright enough to prevent you from leaving, just faint enough to keep you craving more. It doesn't look like cruelty. It looks like almost honest, almost ready, almost better, almost love. They aren't openly abusive. They aren't always neglectful. In fact, sometimes they're wonderful, thoughtful, inspiring, tender, but only in moments. Short bursts, random intervals, never when you need it most, never with consistency, and never enough to give you peace. Instead, they feed you fragments. They ration reassurance like medicine. Just when you're about to give up, just when your heart begins to fracture, they offer a sliver of warmth, a gentle message, a compliment, a memory, a suggestion that things will be different, and it lights something inside you. You think, maybe they do care, maybe this is the turning point. But it's not, because it never is. The warmth fades. The distance returns. You ask for clarity, and they give you ambiguity. You seek honesty, and they give you vagueness. You want action, and they give you promises. The cycle repeats, again and again. And every time you think, this time feels different. It's not different. It's designed. Hope withholding isn't laziness, it's control. By keeping you uncertain, they keep you invested. They never give you closure, because closure sets you free. They never fully deliver, because delivery makes them accountable. But as long as there's hope, however small, you will stay. You will keep trying. You will keep proving your worth, adjusting your boundaries, justifying their silence. You will keep yourself small in hopes they will expand to meet you. And they know that. Even if they can't name it, they feel the power in it. They've learned that if they give too much, they lose control. But if they give too little, you might leave. So, they master the middle, just enough to keep your heart open, your eyes fixed, your mind confused. You begin to live in the spaces between kindness. You replay good moments like evidence in a trial. You collect words like tokens. You decode silence like scripture. You become fluent in their inconsistencies. And in the process, you lose your fluency in yourself. You don't notice how often you're anxious, how much of your day is spent analyzing, waiting, wishing, how often your joy is delayed, your boundaries postponed, your voice quieted. You tell yourself, it's not that bad, but it is. It's bad in a slow, corrosive way, the kind that doesn't break you with impact, but dissolves you with time, because hope, when withheld, becomes a weapon. You begin to doubt your right to ask for more. You tell yourself, I just need to be more patient. But patience without reciprocity isn't noble, it's self-erasure. You think, if I just give them a little more time, they'll meet me. But they won't, because they've already taught you that your waiting is infinite, that your hope is a leash. And here's the brutal truth. They might never be cruel enough to justify walking away, but they'll never be kind enough to let you stay without pain. So, how do you escape? You stop waiting for proof. You stop requiring disaster to validate your instinct. You stop asking, are they doing this on purpose? And start asking, is this helping me live in peace? Because your nervous system doesn't care about intention. It cares about consistency. And if your heart is always in recovery mode, if your mind is always searching for crumbs, it doesn't matter whether they mean to hurt you. They are. And you are allowed to leave a situation that is built on maybe. You are allowed to walk away from someone who won't walk toward you fully. You are allowed to stop hoping, not because you've given up, but because you've woken up. You deserve more than almost, more than sometimes, more than not yet. You deserve clarity. You deserve consistency. You deserve affection that doesn't have to be earned through confusion. And you don't need to stay in pain just because it comes wrapped in moments of relief. Because hope isn't supposed to keep you trapped, it's supposed to guide you home. The targeted flattery, they don't flatter you like everyone else does. They don't say you're smart or you're beautiful in some generic, empty way. No, they're specific, surgical. They say things like, I've never met anyone who can read a room like you. Or, the way you think, it's not just intelligent, it's rare. Or maybe, I feel like you just get me in a way no one else does. And in that moment, you light up. Not because your ego is huge, but because the compliment feels true. It touches something private, something you've always hoped someone might notice. That's the hook. This is the dark art of targeted flattery. Not shallow compliments, but precise emotional engineering. It's not about making you feel good. It's about making you feel seen. And once someone gives you that feeling, it becomes almost impossible to let go of them. You start craving their words like air. Their validation becomes your compass. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin rearranging your identity around their approval. Because they didn't just compliment you, they studied you. And this is the key. Targeted flattery requires observation. Manipulators who use it aren't sloppy. They listen to what you say when you're vulnerable. They notice what you're insecure about, what you value, what makes you feel different from others. And then they reflect those things back to you. Not to honor them, but to own them. It starts innocently. They say, "You're not like other people." And you believe it, because secretly, you've always wanted to believe it. They feed your quiet dreams, your private pride, and each time they affirm something deeply specific, your empathy, your storytelling, your resilience, you feel tethered to them. You think, finally someone who sees the real me. But that's the trap, because now they control that mirror. And you start doing what it takes to keep their gaze warm. You avoid disappointing them. You shift your decisions to stay in their good graces. You start performing, not for the world, but for them. Because losing their approval feels like losing access to the version of yourself you liked best. And it doesn't stop there. Once they've conditioned you to associate their words with your worth, they begin to withhold it, subtly, quietly. They stop complimenting you as often. Or their praise becomes lukewarm. They say, "You used to be so intuitive. What happened?" Or, "I just feel like you're slipping lately." And now, you're spiraling. You do more, say more, try harder. Just to feel that little spark again, the one that made you feel like someone special. This is not love. This is not friendship. This is identity theft disguised as intimacy. Because what they're doing isn't just flattery, it's possession. They want to be the sole source of your self-esteem, the only voice that gets to define you. And when they succeed, they don't need to control you with threats or punishment. They control you with silence. You stop trusting your own instincts. You question your choices when they are not affirmed. You shrink from paths that might cause distance between you. And all the while, they remain calm, superior, slightly disappointed, but never cruel. That's what makes it so effective. Because they're not hurting you. Not really. They're just not impressed anymore. And so, you chase. You apologize. You adapt. You forget who you were before their words built you. This tactic is especially potent for people who grew up starved for recognition. If no one ever truly saw your gifts, then targeted flattery feels like a miracle, like finally being understood. But in the wrong hands, it becomes a leash. Think about it. Why does it feel so intoxicating when someone praises something obscure about you? Why do you remember the one person who noticed your sense of timing, or the way you pause before you speak, or the quiet strength you show when you're grieving? Because those aren't compliments. They're emotional currency. And once someone proves they understand your worth better than others, they start acting like they own it. It happens in toxic relationships. Romantic partners who praise your depth, your insight, your emotional intelligence, then later use that praise to say, "I expected more from you," or "You're not acting like yourself lately." And you panic, not because of the words, but because you fear losing the version of yourself they once admired. It happens in cults. Leaders who single out a member and say, "You have a unique gift, a sensitivity others don't." And that person, often overlooked all their life, blooms under the attention, until they're doing everything to stay in that spotlight. Even when the demands grow darker, it happens in corporate manipulation. A boss who tells you, "You're the only one I can count on for this kind of work," then loads you with impossible tasks. And you say yes, because you don't want to go back to being just another employee. Targeted flattery turns identity into leverage. So, how do you protect yourself? Start by noticing how praise affects you. If a compliment feels like relief, like you've been waiting your whole life to hear it, pause. Ask, why does this matter so much to me? And more importantly, what happens if they stop saying it? Second, build internal mirrors. Don't wait for someone else to define your unique traits. Name them. Own them. Be able to say, "I am good at this," without waiting for applause. The less hungry you are for recognition, the harder you are to control. Third, watch what happens when you disappoint them. Does their love evaporate? Do they grow cold, distant, disapproving? That's not connection. That's dependency training. And finally, remember this. Real love, real friendship, real mentorship does not fear your growth. It does not use your uniqueness as a tether. It celebrates it even when you walk away, even when you no longer need the approval. Because the most powerful words someone can give you are not, "You're special because I say so," but "You've always been this, even before I said it." So, if someone ever makes you feel like their validation is oxygen, breathe deeper. Step back. Reclaim your self-worth. Because you don't need their mirror to see yourself clearly. The emotional contagion. You walk into a room and nothing has been said, but something has already shifted inside you. The air feels heavier. Someone is angry, or panicked, or overwhelmed with grief. And before you know it, you feel it too. Not because you've experienced what they've experienced, not because the facts have changed, but because their emotional energy has hijacked your nervous system. That's the emotional contagion. And it's more powerful than most people realize. You don't need words to catch it. Emotions spread like wildfire through expressions, body language, tone, posture, even silence. Your brain is constantly scanning others for emotional cues, often below your level of awareness. This isn't empathy. It's imitation. It's the involuntary mirroring of someone else's emotional state until you forget where your feelings end and theirs begin. It happens in crowds, at protests, in stadiums, in funerals, in moments of shared fear. One scream becomes a dozen. One gasp ripples through hundreds. The human nervous system is wired to synchronize, and when one person's emotion burns hot enough, it infects the whole room. But the danger isn't just in group settings, it's in personal relationships too. One person's anxiety can become your anxiety. Their anger, your anger, their urgency, your urgency. You think you're reacting to the situation, but you're not. You're reacting to their reaction. That's the terrifying trick of emotional contagion. It bypasses logic. It overrides reflection. And it clouds judgment. Because when someone around you is intensely emotional, your brain interprets that emotion as a signal. Not just a state of mind, but proof. Proof that something must be wrong. That someone must be to blame. That action must be taken now. It doesn't matter if the facts are incomplete, if the threat isn't real, if the outrage is exaggerated. Your body responds as if it's all true, because the emotional signal is louder than the data. This is why manipulators use emotion as a weapon. They cry when cornered. They yell when questioned. They act panicked when you're calm, so your brain thinks you must be missing something. They escalate their emotional intensity until you feel guilty for being rational, until you stop thinking and start responding to the emotion, not the reality. And when enough people around you are swept up in it, the pressure to join becomes unbearable. Not because of reason, not because of evidence, but because no one wants to be the cold one, the unfeeling one, the outsider. So you mirror, and once you mirror, you justify. Your brain rewrites the story to match the emotion. If you're angry, then someone must deserve that anger. If you're afraid, there must be danger. The feeling becomes the lens, and everything you see, everything you believe, becomes tinted by it. Think of mob behavior. How ordinary people get pulled into chaos. Not because they were evil or unhinged, but because the emotional intensity around them drowned their individual filter, their judgment, their restraint. When everyone is shouting, reason becomes silence, and silence feels like complicity. But emotional contagion doesn't just drive violence or panic. It can be subtle. It can look like compassion. Think of how you absorb the emotional tone of a close friend. If they're constantly hopeless, you start to feel drained. If they're always in crisis, you begin to live in their storm. Not because you're weak, but because your brain wants to connect, wants to synchronize. And that desire can blur the line between supporting someone and becoming them. It can even warp your decisions. You agree to things you wouldn't normally agree to, because someone feels strongly about it. You stay silent when you should speak, because someone's reaction feels too fragile. You take on their fear, their rage, their despair, until you're not sure if it's even yours anymore. You begin to live inside someone else's emotional reality. And when that happens, you lose your ability to evaluate truth. Because emotional contagion creates urgency without clarity. It makes you act before you think. It pulls you into states of intensity that aren't based on your values, but on their pain. And pain, while real, isn't always right. So, what can you do? You learn to pause, to ask, is this mine? That simple question is a line in the sand. It reminds you to check your source, not just of facts, but of feelings. It reminds you that empathy isn't submission, that understanding someone's pain doesn't mean adopting their worldview. You build emotional boundaries, not walls, but filters. You feel with others, not for them. You allow space for their storm without letting it uproot your inner ground. Because the most powerful people aren't those who feel nothing. They're the ones who feel fully, but stay clear anyway. They don't drown in the emotional current. They become the anchor, because emotion is contagious, but so is clarity, so is calm, so is truth. And the world doesn't need more reactors. It needs people who can feel without being fooled. The closure denial, you ask them a question, simple, direct, honest. Why did you leave? What changed? Was any of it real? But instead of answers, you get fog, silence, contradictions, platitudes that sound wise but say nothing. And you wait. You rewind. You spiral. Because your mind can't settle without a thread to tie the story together. You replay every detail, hunting for clues. And while you do that, while you search and ache and blame yourself, they walk away untouched. This isn't just emotional cruelty. It's a psychological weapon, a tactic known as closure denial. Closure denial is not passive. It's not just someone being bad at communication. It's a choice, a calculated withholding of clarity, a refusal to give you the basic human dignity of understanding. Because when someone denies you closure, they're not just ending a connection. They're ensuring that the ending keeps echoing inside you. They trap you in the unfinished. Think of it like a story with the last page torn out. Your brain, wired for resolution, can't stop trying to fill in the blank. That's how we're built. Our minds crave meaning. We need narratives that make sense, even painful ones. Without that, we turn inward. We start thinking, was it my fault? Did I miss the signs? Am I unlovable? And while you torture yourself with those questions, they remain comfortably unaccountable. That's the real function of closure denial, to avoid responsibility while transferring the weight of confusion onto you. It shows up in relationships where someone ghosts you without explanation, in friendships that slowly dissolve without confrontation, in jobs where you're let go without a real reason. You ask for answers, and all you get is ambiguity, half-truths, gaslighted fragments, or worse, nothing. You're left holding the emotional debris alone, trying to assemble a coherent story from silence. And the longer that silence lasts, the louder your mind becomes. You reread texts. You analyze tone. You remember every laugh, every argument, every touch, and ask yourself, where did I go wrong? This is not healing. It's a loop, a cognitive distortion engineered by the absence of truth. And the most dangerous part is that you start rewriting the story in a way that protects them. Maybe I was too needy. Maybe I misread everything. Maybe they just couldn't handle me. You start editing your own memory so that their abandonment makes sense. But this isn't about your failure. It's about their avoidance. People who deny closure do so because truth would cost them something. Accountability, vulnerability, honesty. So instead, they disappear. Or worse, they stay just present enough to confuse you. They drop breadcrumbs of affection, a like, a vague message, an accidental text, not to reconnect, but to keep you unresolved. That's how they retain control, because an open loop still has power. This tactic is especially effective on people who are self-reflective. If you're the type to examine your role, to want to grow, to seek understanding, you're vulnerable to this, because instead of getting angry, you get curious. You dig into your own psyche, trying to find the reason for their behavior. But no matter how deep you dig, it's a trap, because the answers aren't in you. They're in the silence they left behind, and they're not giving them to you. So, how do you break the spell? You give yourself closure. You write your own final page. You stop waiting for their words to validate your experience. You stop believing that the absence of answers means the presence of your guilt. Closure isn't something someone gives you. It's something you choose when you decide to stop negotiating with their silence. This doesn't mean you don't care. It means you stop begging for truth from someone who profits from your confusion. And when the doubt creeps in, and it will, you remind yourself, yes, people grow apart. Yes, some things end without a villain. But when someone disappears instead of confronting, dodges instead of explaining, stays silent while you suffer, that's not complexity. That's cowardice. You deserved an answer. You didn't get one. And that's the answer. Let it be enough. Let it burn through the fog. Let it close the loop. Not because they gave you peace, but because you refuse to stay stuck in their unfinished story. You're allowed to stop asking. You're allowed to walk away without the apology. You're allowed to heal without permission, because you're not confused. You're not broken. You're not impossible to love. You were just left in the dark by someone too afraid to face the light. And that's not your burden anymore. The fear anchoring. You could have reached out. You could have asked. You could have questioned. But you didn't. Not because you didn't need help, but because the idea of asking felt dangerous. What if they judge you? What if they twist it against you? What if going to them makes things worse? So, instead you stayed silent. Not out of choice, but out of something colder. Something deeper. Fear. Not panic. Not screaming, flailing terror. This fear is quieter. It hides in implications, in warnings, in raised eyebrows, in stories passed down not for information, but for containment. This is fear anchoring. A psychological cage designed not with locks, but with associations. Associating your potential lifelines with dread, shame, or threat. And over time, you don't just avoid those lifelines, you start to believe that you are safer without them. This tactic is ancient, and it is devastating. Here's how it works. You have an idea, a question, a feeling that something is wrong. And just as you begin to move toward support, toward clarity, toward help, someone steps in with the anchor. Oh, you're not thinking of talking to them, are you? They'll only make it worse. You know what happens to people who challenge this, right? That therapist will brainwash you. That movement is dangerous. That friend can't be trusted. And you back off. Just a little, because now help feels risky. Truth feels radioactive. And the very paths that once seemed like doors now feel like traps. This is not just discouragement. It's isolation. Fear anchoring makes sure that the places you could run to are coded in just enough suspicion, just enough threat, that you don't run at all. And if you've ever found yourself stuck, knowing you're in pain, knowing you need a way out, but convinced that every option leads to something worse, then you've felt the chains. The brilliance of this trap is that it doesn't need to punish you. It only needs to make you punish yourself by keeping you afraid of every possible exit. Governments do this with whistleblowers. Families do this with black sheep. Abusers do this with friends, therapists, outside contact. Cultures do this with people who challenge their narratives. They don't just keep you from leaving. They teach you that outside is worse than inside, that the unknown is fatal, that they out there are liars, manipulators, demons in disguise. So, you stay. And the prison doesn't need bars. It just needs belief. But here's the terrifying part. The longer you stay, the more real the fear feels, because your world shrinks. The only voices you hear are the ones reinforcing the anchor. Your doubts begin to feel like betrayals. Your curiosity feels dangerous. Your silence feels safe. And that's the goal, not your loyalty, your paralysis. Because a silent, frightened person is far easier to control than a vocal, hopeful one. So, what do? They isolate the people you trust. They demonize the tools that might save you. They inject fear into the very idea of leaving. And then, they don't have to do anything else. You'll stay put. Not because you want to, but because you've forgotten that you can leave. And if you've ever wondered, why didn't they speak up? Why didn't they walk away? Why didn't they reach for help? Look for the anchor. It's always there. But here's the truth that fear anchoring tries to erase. Fear is not fact. The danger you've been taught to believe in may not be danger at all. That friend you were told to avoid, they may be your lifeline. That voice you were warned about, it may be your truth. That path that looks too terrifying to take, it may be the only way out. Fear anchoring doesn't just distort the outside world. It warps your inner compass. It makes courage feel like recklessness, healing feel like betrayal, and independence feel like exile. But if you feel it, If something in you whispers that you are trapped, not because you're weak, but because every door has been painted with dread, then you're not crazy. You're caught in a design built to protect power, not people. And the only way out is to test the anchors. Ask, who told me this is dangerous? Whose voice am I afraid of hearing? What would happen if I reached out anyway? Because sometimes, the moment you reach past the fear, the anchor dissolves. And what was painted as a monster is revealed as an ally. What looked like exile becomes freedom. And what felt like death becomes life. You were never meant to live inside fear, especially not fear planted there by someone else. So, if you've been told to stay quiet, speak. If you've been warned not to reach out, reach. And if you've been told the outside is dangerous, walk outside anyway, because no one controls you more than the person who controls your fear. Break that, and the world opens again. The urgency infection, you wake up to a message marked ASAP. Before your feet hit the floor, someone needs you. Something's wrong. A task is overdue. A problem is unfolding. And even if it isn't, someone acts like it is. Notifications, alarms. We need this now. It can't wait. Drop everything. And so, you do. Again and again. Until slowly, without realizing it, your entire body lives in the posture of panic. This is the urgency infection, a psychological condition where your mind is trained to treat every moment like a crisis, every request like a command, every pause like a failure. And it doesn't happen all at once. It spreads, quietly. It hijacks your sense of priority, infects your nervous system, and turns calm into guilt, rest into risk, reflection into a luxury you think you can't afford. It works because urgency feels real. It feels important, even righteous. When someone says, "I need you now," you react, because you're wired to. Evolution made you hypersensitive to perceived threats and social pressure. But when urgency becomes constant, it becomes a weapon, a tool to override your discernment, to make you act fast, before you can think clearly. And that's the point, because the more anxious you are, the more obedient you become. The more reactive you are, the easier you are to control. The more flooded your system, the less access you have to higher reasoning, to doubt, to refusal, to truth. Urgency short-circuits analysis. You don't ask, "Is this real?" You ask, "How do I fix it?" You don't ask, "Is this right?" You ask, "How do I not disappoint them?" And the people who benefit from that, they know it. They rely on it. They create a world where everything is a fire, everything is a deadline, everything is do or die. You see it in toxic workplaces, where urgent becomes the default setting, where poor planning is reframed as a crisis you must solve. You see it in manipulative relationships, where demands are always framed as emergencies. If you really cared, you'd respond now. You see it in political propaganda, where fear and chaos keep the public too rattled to question authority. It's never just about speed, it's about submission. And over time, you start internalizing the urgency. You feel guilty for taking breaks. You apologize for responding too slowly. Even when slow just means reasonable, you rush through your thoughts, your days, your life, always trying to get ahead of the next demand. Your breathing shortens, your sleep fractures, your attention splinters, and worst of all, your trust in your own timing erodes. You don't know when you want to do something. You only know when someone else says it must be done. You become a vessel for their timeline, their pressure, their panic, and even when there is no crisis, you still feel one coming. You're always on edge, waiting, scanning, bracing, not because the threat is real, but because your body has been trained to expect it. That's how deep the infection goes. But here's what they never want you to realize. When everything is urgent, nothing is. Because urgency without hierarchy is chaos. Urgency without truth is manipulation. And urgency without recovery is trauma. You weren't made for constant alert. Your body can survive it, but it will break in the process. Your relationships will become strained. Your thinking will become reactive. Your identity will blur into whatever role urgency demands. So, how do you stop the infection? You reclaim the pause. You practice disappointing people. You remember that slowness is not laziness. It is sovereignty. That calm is not optional. It is clarity. That not everything needs a response. Not every request deserves your adrenaline. Not every ping should be treated like a fire alarm. You build rituals that interrupt the spiral. A moment of breath before you reply. A, let me think about it before you agree. A, why is this urgent before you engage? And when they say, it's always urgent, you learn to ask, for who? Because often, urgency is less about need and more about control. It's a tactic to keep you so busy reacting that you never notice how scripted your life has become. So wired to respond that you forget to choose. So trained to serve that you forget to see. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. You start noticing which people always bring a storm. Which systems keep you breathless. Which messages never let you rest. You stop mistaking pressure for importance. You stop rewarding those who infect you with their panic. And you begin to move differently. Slower. Stronger. Wiser. You protect your nervous system as if it's sacred, because it is. You guard your time like it matters, because it does. And you learn to trust that real urgency reveals itself. It doesn't need to shout. It doesn't hijack. It doesn't shame you for being human. So let them panic. Let them spiral. Let them bang on the walls of your silence. You don't have to open the door, because your peace isn't optional. It's the cure. The micro-reward loop. You don't even notice it at first. A like here, a heart emoji, a good job from your boss, a nod of approval from someone you admire. Small things, tiny affirmations, but over time, they begin to shape your behavior. You find yourself refreshing the page, checking the message, glancing sideways for the reaction. Not because you need the reward itself, but because you've been conditioned to expect one. And worse, you've been trained to chase it. This is the micro-reward loop, a psychological trap engineered to hijack your dopamine and slowly turn your autonomy into obedience. It begins innocently. A post gets attention, a task earns praise, a message receives applause, your brain lights up, dopamine floods in. But then it happens again and again until the pattern is set. You start checking, not because anything urgent is happening, but because your brain is now wired for the possibility of pleasure, and that possibility becomes the leash. The key to the micro-reward loop isn't constant gratification, it's intermittent gratification. The system doesn't reward you every time. In fact, that's the point. If it did, the effect would fade. But unpredictability? That's addictive, just like a slot machine, just like a toxic relationship, just like any psychological loop designed to make you try just one more time. Because what hooks you isn't the reward, it's the uncertainty, the anticipation, the hope that this time will be the hit you were waiting for. This isn't random. It's behavioral science. B.F. Skinner, one of the fathers of operant conditioning, discovered that pigeons pressed levers more compulsively when the food pellets came at unpredictable intervals. Not regular intervals, random ones. That uncertainty created obsession, and we're no different. Scroll through social media, maybe this time you'll go viral. Open your email, maybe there's praise waiting. Check your messages, maybe someone finally noticed how much effort you put in. And every time there is a little payoff, your brain screams, "See? It's working." But what's really working is the trap. Because now your behavior isn't goal-directed, it's stimulus-driven. You're not acting because something matters. You're acting because you might get rewarded. And so, your sense of purpose begins to erode. You work longer hours. You tailor your personality to what earns validation. You perform instead of express. You chase instead of choose. And the loop tightens. You get a compliment on your outfit, so the next day, you dress even more carefully. You get approval for a clever take online, so your opinions become more curated. You get praise for being agreeable at work, so you mute your real voice to stay in good favor. Not because you're fake, but because your identity is now a maze, and the reward is always just around the next corner. Worse still, the absence of reward starts to feel like punishment. When you post something and it gets ignored, it hurts. When you speak and no one reacts, it feels like rejection. When you try and the world stays silent, your brain doesn't say, maybe that wasn't the right moment. It says, you failed. And you try again. You tweak, you conform, you adapt. Not for growth, but for response. And slowly the feedback loop becomes your master. This is why you check your phone before you even blink in the morning. Why you refresh notifications without thinking. Why you replay interactions in your head, wondering if you please them enough to earn the next smile, the next nod, the next crumb. But here's the cruelest part. You don't even want the reward anymore. You just want the relief of not being ignored. That's when you know you're deep inside the loop. The micro-reward loop doesn't just manipulate your behavior. It rewires your desire. It teaches you the value comes from outside yourself, from metrics, from reactions, from other people's attention. It detaches you from intrinsic motivation. It makes you forget what you used to do simply because you loved doing it. And the people who understand this loop, the ones who design systems, platforms, management hierarchies, they use it to their advantage. Social media platforms are built on variable reward schedules. Every scroll is a lottery ticket. Every post a gamble. Your nervous system is the product, and your attention is the currency. Workplaces do it too. They dangle praise like a carrot, just enough to keep you striving, never enough to let you rest. Manipulative partners withhold affection until you learn exactly how to behave. They train you to jump through invisible hoops, always guessing which version of you earns warmth. So, how do you escape? First, see the loop for what it is. You're not bad at focusing. You're not addicted to your phone by accident. You've been conditioned. Awareness doesn't break the loop immediately, but it pulls you out of autopilot. Second, reclaim intentionality. Ask yourself, why am I doing this? What am I hoping to feel right now? If the answer is because someone might notice, pause. That's the loop whispering. Step back. Third, starve the loop of unpredictability. Turn off notifications. Set times to check. Stop checking for response and start creating for meaning. The more predictable and intentional your environment becomes, the less grip random reinforcement has on your brain. And finally, rediscover intrinsic validation. You were not born needing approval to feel worthy. You were taught that pattern, and you can unlearn it. Create something and don't share it. Finish a task and tell no one. Say something true and don't measure the reaction. Let your own values, your own satisfaction, your own clarity be the reward. Because the truth is, when you live inside the micro-reward loop, you may look busy, even successful, but inside, you're starving. Starving for real peace, real meaning, real selfhood. And that doesn't come from likes or praise or dopamine spikes. It comes from choosing to be free, even when no one is watching. The identity overload. You were once just you. A child with instincts, with raw emotion, with a sense of self that needed no explanation. But then the labels began. Smart, shy, rebellious, gifted, stubborn, daughter, son, student. Role after role was handed to you. By family, by school, by society. You didn't ask for them. Some felt flattering, others suffocating. But all of them began to stick. Until somewhere along the way, you forgot who was underneath. That's the slow erosion of the identity overload. It doesn't happen all at once. It's not violent. It's quiet. It's systematic. You get praised for being a certain way, and so you perform it more. You get criticized for another, so you hide it. Over time, your true personality is edited, not by introspection, but by survival. You become a collage of other people's expectations, a mask layered over a mask, until the original face is hard to remember. And here's where it becomes dangerous. When your sense of identity is built on labels that others have created, it becomes easier to manipulate you. Why? Because labels come with scripts, with rules, with duties you never consented to. And the more roles you juggle, the harder it becomes to say no. You're a daughter, so you must forgive. You're a leader, so you can't show weakness. You're a man, so you shouldn't cry. You're a good employee, so you won't push back. These roles are often invisible contracts. Each one narrows your behavior. And when multiple labels stack on top of each other, they start to conflict, compete, overwhelm. You become so consumed with who you're supposed to be that you lose access to who you are. And when someone finally asks you a simple question, what do you want? You freeze, because you're not sure. That's the terrifying part of identity overload. It doesn't just distort how others see you, it distorts how you see yourself. It makes it harder to defend your boundaries, because you're not sure which you those boundaries are protecting. The parent, the friend, the professional, the strong one, the healer, the quiet one who never complains. It becomes easier to just comply, to say yes, to fall in line. Because when your identity is fragmented, so is your resistance. This is exactly how systems control people, not through direct force, but through role confusion. They give you titles, praise you for playing your part, and shame you when you step out of line, not as punishment, but as correction. You're not being yourself, they'll say. But what they really mean is, you're not being who we need you to be. The overload becomes a trap. You become the fixer in your family, even when you're falling apart. The dependable one at work, even when you're quietly burning out. The funny one in your friend group, even when your laughter feels fake. The advocate online, even when you've run out of words. And worst of all, if you try to step back from any role, the world makes you feel guilty, as if you're abandoning something sacred, as if being whole means being selfish. But it's not selfish, it's essential. Because if you don't reclaim your core identity, the one beneath the roles, you become a puppet in other people's play. A shapeshifter molded by the desires, projections, and narratives of others. Easy to direct, easy to guilt, easy to silence. You start second-guessing your instincts, over-apologizing for boundaries, numbing yourself to keep the peace. And slowly you disappear, still functioning, still fine, but empty. There's a reason burnout doesn't always come from doing too much. It often comes from being too many things to too many people, from performing a self that isn't real, from carrying masks that were handed to you before you ever knew how to say no. But here's the truth. You are not a role. You are not a label. You are not the version of yourself that others find most useful. You are something deeper, older, truer. And you don't need to explain that self. You need to feel it, return to it, guard it. Because when you strip away the expectations, the scripts, the imposed identities, you don't become less. You become clear. And clarity is power. When you know who you are beneath the noise, it becomes easier to say no, to push back, to refuse the roles that drain you, to reject the praise that chains you, to walk away from the applause if it comes at the cost of your peace. So start small. Notice when a label tightens instead of frees you. Question praise that feels like pressure. Let go of roles that were assigned, not chosen. And when someone tries to use your identity against you, ask, who benefits from this version of me? Because identity should be a foundation, not a leash. And if it's keeping you obedient, quiet, or confused, it's not yours. Take it off. You were never meant to be everyone's everything. You were meant to be you, fully, fiercely, without apology. The withdrawal threat. At first, it feels warm, affection that wraps around you, support that seems unconditional, compliments that drip like honey. You're perfect just the way you are. No one understands you like I do. And you believe them. Why wouldn't you? This is what care is supposed to feel like. You open up, you soften, you trust. And then one day, without warning, it shifts. You do something small, you disagree, you set a boundary. You express a need they didn't expect, and suddenly, the warmth is gone. They go silent, cold, distant. They pull back affection like it's a reward you failed to earn. They withhold validation. They cancel plans. They speak in clipped sentences. Or maybe they vanish altogether, and you don't understand why. You replay what you did. You ask, was I too harsh? Did I hurt them? Was it wrong to say what I felt? But what you're actually doing is internalizing a lesson they never said aloud, but taught with precision. If you step outside the role they assigned you, they'll disappear. This is the withdrawal threat, a covert form of emotional control, where love, attention, or even basic resources are withdrawn the moment you show signs of independence. It's not always explosive. It's often quiet, subtle, psychological. But the message it sends is deafening. Autonomy will cost you connection. It often begins with small tests. You want to spend time with other friends, and they sulk. You express a different opinion, and they get cold. You succeed at something without their help, and instead of celebrating, they retreat. These aren't coincidences, they're consequences. And you begin to notice the pattern. Every time you act freely, they punish you with distance. The mind, wired for survival and belonging, learns fast. You associate independence with loss. Speaking your truth becomes dangerous. Pursuing your goals feels selfish. Asserting yourself leads to emotional famine. So you adjust. You shrink. You mute your opinions. You make yourself smaller, not because you don't know who you are, but because you've been trained to believe that being yourself means being left. This is the trauma of conditional closeness. The realization that love, as offered to you, comes with terms. And the most important term is compliance. This tactic works because it doesn't appear violent. On the surface, the person withholding doesn't look abusive. They're just taking space. They're tired. They need time to think. But underneath, the impact is surgical. You begin to manage their moods before managing your own. You calculate your actions through their potential reactions. Your nervous system becomes wired not for freedom, but for avoidance. You stop asking, "What do I want?" and start asking, "What will make them stay?" The longer this dynamic continues, the more your inner compass erodes. You stop trusting your instincts. You doubt your boundaries. You become someone you don't recognize. Agreeable, over-accommodating, anxious to please. And when people ask what's wrong, you say, "Nothing, they're just going through something." But deep down, you know what's happening. You're being conditioned. Conditioned to see independence as betrayal. Conditioned to earn love by forfeiting freedom. Conditioned to believe that if you ever fully become yourself, they'll walk away. This tactic isn't just emotional cruelty, it's power. Because when someone controls your access to warmth, affection, or basic support based on how obedient you are, they don't have to use force. You'll do it to yourself. You'll hand over your autonomy in exchange for temporary connection. And you'll think it was your choice. But it wasn't. Real love doesn't flinch at boundaries. Real care doesn't vanish when you stand tall. Real connection expands as you grow. It doesn't recoil. Withdrawal as punishment is not love. It's control dressed in affection's clothing. So, how do you break free? You start by recognizing the pattern. Ask yourself, does this person only love me when I'm agreeable? Do they become distant when I express independence? Do I feel anxious every time I advocate for myself? Then you test the waters. You make small, honest choices for yourself, and you watch what happens. Do they support your growth? Or do they shrink away from it? Your nervous system will feel terrified. That's normal, because it's not just about this person. It's about every earlier wound they've reactivated, the ones that taught you early on that love must be earned by obedience. But here's the truth they never told you. You do not have to choose between freedom and connection. Anyone who makes you pick is not offering love, they're offering leverage, so you choose yourself. Not in bitterness, not in rebellion, but in truth. You say, I can care about you and still protect my autonomy. I can love and still leave if I'm being controlled. I will no longer trade my wholeness for your approval. And if they withdraw, let them. Let them take their silence, their sulking, their subtle punishments, and walk. Because love that vanishes the moment you express who you really are was never love. It was a leash, and you were never meant to be kept. The narrative hijack. You used to have a sense of direction, a vague but real sense of who you were, what you valued, what mattered. Even if it wasn't perfect, it was yours. But somewhere along the way, the story changed. And now, when you look back, it's hard to tell which parts were your choices, and which were written for you. This is the narrative hijack. It doesn't look like control, it looks like persuasion, guidance, advice. This is what's best for you. We just want what's right. You'll thank us later. And so you agree, at first. You take the job, stay in the relationship, join the cause, not because it burns with purpose inside you, but because it makes sense on paper. Because someone you trust said it was right. But then you wake up years later and realize the life you're living doesn't feel like home. It feels like a role, a story with a main character that's wearing your face, but walking a path you didn't choose. Because somewhere along the way, you were edited. This isn't science fiction, it's psychology. And it happens more than you think. Parents do it to children, managers do it to employees, partners do it in subtle moments that seem like compromise but are really conquest. Cultures do it with labels, assigning meaning to race, gender, class, identity, until you feel trapped in a script written centuries before you were born. The narrative hijack doesn't scream, it whispers. It whispers that ambition is arrogance, that obedience is maturity, that questioning is betrayal, that safety is more important than truth. So you adjust, edit your behavior, suppress the scenes that don't fit, reframe the memory, rewrite your desires. You start to believe things like, I guess I was never cut out for that anyway, or maybe this is just who I'm meant to be. But that belief isn't clarity, it's submission, because identity under a hijacked narrative isn't discovered, it's assigned. You become the reliable one, the good child, the company man, the reasonable woman. And the more you live into that story, the more the original you fades. And here's where it gets brutal. The hijack feels good at first. You're praised, you're accepted, you're rewarded for staying in the lines. But those rewards come with strings. Stay useful to the story, or be cast as the villain. Speak out, you're ungrateful. Change direction, you're unstable. Reclaim your voice, you're dangerous. Because when someone hijacks your story, they don't just want your cooperation. They want your belief. They want you to forget the original script ever existed. And over time, you do. You lose track of where you end and they begin. You find yourself defending things that once disgusted you, accepting limits that once enraged you, smiling through choices that feel like quiet deaths, and you wonder, did I choose this? Or did I just forget how not to? That's the real horror of the narrative hijack. Not that someone else is writing your life, but that you begin to believe you wrote it yourself. But there's a way back, and it begins not with rage, but with recognition. You pause, you rewind, you look at your life scene by scene, not through the lens of who you've become, but through the eyes of who you were before the edits began. You remember the parts that felt most alive. You trace the moments where your voice was overwritten. You ask, with terrifying honesty, what was taken from me in the name of love, in the name of stability, in the name of being good? And you grieve. You mourn the chapters that weren't yours, the dreams left behind, the parts of you that were renamed so someone else could feel safe. But then, you begin to write again. Not with rebellion, not with vengeance, with intention. You choose new lines, new language. You stop justifying the roles you never auditioned for. You start asking, what do I want now? Not what would make them proud, not what fits the brand. What burns inside me, even if no one claps? And at first, the old authors will resist. They'll say you're changing. They'll say you're ungrateful. They'll try to remind you of the good old days, the edited version. Let them. Because when someone hijacks your story, your truth becomes a threat to their illusion. So, threaten it. Refuse the narration. Say no to the quiet edits, the subtle scripts, the praise soaked in control, and say yes to the original voice, the one that cracked, broke, whispered, but never disappeared. Because that voice, it was never gone, just silenced. But you can unmute it, one word at a time.